Welcome, welcome. You're here at Watch Harry. Today we present to you Doctor Strange read Harry's fate lines at age 7 and found Dumbledore had stolen his true destiny. Like and subscribe if you want more awesome stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Cupboard. The cupboard smelled like dust and old rubber and the particular kind of loneliness that settles into walls when it's been there long enough. Harry Potter was 7 years old, and he had lived in this cupboard for as long as he could remember clearly, which wasn't saying much, because the Dursleys had a talent for making the memorable forgettable and the forgettable feel eternal. He was sitting cross-legged on his thin mattress, a broken toy soldier in his lap, trying to fix it with a bit of tape he'd found stuck to the underside of the shelf above his head. The soldier's arm had snapped off, Dudley's fault, naturally, though the explanation offered to Aunt Petunia had involved Harry tripping and stepping on it, which was the kind of story that stuck because everyone in the house wanted it to be true. Harry pressed the arm back against the socket. The tape wouldn't hold. He tried again, pressing harder, willing it to just stay, and then something happened. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the quietest thing imaginable, a sound like a single harp string plucked somewhere behind the air itself, and then the cupboard filled with light. Not the yellow-orange of a light bulb. Not sunlight bleeding under the door. This was silver-white and it moved, drifting in slow ribbons through the small space, and Harry sat completely still because he was afraid that if he breathed wrong it would stop. The broken toy soldier in his lap slowly, gently, clicked back together. The tape fell away, unnecessary. Harry stared at it. Then he looked up, and the ribbons of light were pulling together, gathering themselves like smoke being sucked back into a source, converging on a single point in the air about a foot in front of his face, and then that point tore. There was no other word for it. The air simply opened. It didn't shatter or explode. It peeled back, like something on the other side had reached through and pulled, and beyond the tear was not darkness but a strange, deep blue-gold space that looked like the inside of a place that existed between places. A hand reached through. It was a man's hand, long-fingered, bearing faint silver scars across the knuckles that caught the light strangely. It gripped the edge of the tear the way you'd grip a doorframe stepping into an unfamiliar room, and then the man stepped through, and the tear sealed behind him with that same quiet harp note, and suddenly Harry's cupboard was somehow occupied by a full-grown adult in a deep blue tunic with a red cloak that shifted slightly even though there was no wind. He was tall. Dark-haired, going silver at the temples. Sharp face, sharp eyes, gray as iron, and currently scanning every inch of the small space with an intensity that Harry recognized instinctively as the look of someone calculating something important. Not threatening. Just extraordinarily focused. He looked down at Harry. Harry looked up at him. "Huh," the man said, and his voice was low and precise, the kind of voice that expected to be listened to. "You're smaller than I expected." Harry looked at the toy soldier in his lap, now perfectly intact, and then back at the man. "You came through the air," he said. "I did." "How?" "Magic." The man crouched down so he wasn't looming quite so much, resting his elbows on his knees. Up close, his eyes were doing something Harry had never seen eyes do before. There were flickers in them, like light moving through water, as though he was seeing things Harry couldn't. "My name is Stephen Strange. I'm the Sorcerer Supreme, which is a title that means more than it sounds like, and I'll explain it properly later. Right now I need you to stay still and not be frightened, because I have to look at something, and it will be unusual." "What something?" Harry said. "You. Specifically, the lines of your fate." Strange tilted his head slightly. "You know what fate is?" "Like destiny," Harry said. "What's supposed to happen to you?" "Close enough." Strange reached out one hand, not touching Harry, just holding it palm open about 6 inches from Harry's face, and those silver-scarred fingers spread slightly and the light came back, softer this time, gold rather than white, threading out from Strange's fingertips and drifting toward Harry like curious animals. "Everyone has them. Fate lines. They're woven into the aura, the the energy field around a living person. They show where your life is tending, what you're naturally meant for, what's been decided and what's still open. He paused. Most people's look like rivers. Complicated, yes, but they flow in their own natural courses. The golden light touched Harry's skin and Harry felt nothing except a faint warmth, like standing near a fireplace on a cold day. Strange's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. "What does mine look like?" Harry said. Strange was quiet for a moment too long. "Yours," he said, very carefully, "looks like someone took a river and built a dam across it, redirected it through pipes, and then buried the original riverbed under concrete." His jaw tightened. "And then went back and seeded the concrete with wildflowers so no one would look twice." Harry had no idea what that meant. But he knew, the way children always know, that the adult in front of him was angry. Not at Harry. At something done to Harry. "Is that bad?" Harry said. Strange looked at him properly for the first time, not studying him, actually seeing him, and something in his expression changed. The calculation went somewhere quieter, and what was left was something steadier. More honest. "Yes," he said. "That's bad." He lowered his hand, and the golden light retreated. "How long have you lived in here?" "In here?" Harry glanced around at the cupboard walls. "Always, I think." "The people outside? The Dursleys?" Harry's expression went carefully neutral in the way of children who have learned that talking about certain things invites certain kinds of trouble. "They're my aunt and uncle. I know who they are. I'm asking how they treat you." "Fine," Harry said, which was technically a word that could mean almost anything. Strange studied him for a moment and didn't push it. He shifted instead, settling back against the cupboard wall opposite Harry, which barely had space for him, but he managed it with the kind of economy of movement that suggested he was used to working in difficult conditions, and looked at the toy soldier in Harry's lap. "You fixed that just now," Strange said. "Without meaning to. Things happen sometimes. Aunt Petunia says I'm strange." Harry paused. "Sorry. I mean, it's fine. I've been called worse." A brief dryness in his voice that might have been the edge of a sense of humor. "The things that happen around you. How often?" Harry thought about it. "A lot," he admitted. "When I'm upset mostly. Or when I really want something. Once when Dudley's gang was chasing me at school I ended up on the roof." "You teleported." "I didn't know that was what it was called." "And the lights just now? The ribbons?" Harry shook his head. "That was different. That's never happened before. Usually it's smaller things." "Messier." He looked at his hands. Small, thin-wristed, with a faded scar on one thumb from a kitchen accident Petunia hadn't noticed for a day and a half. "I'm not trying to do it." "I know," Strange said. "What happened just now was you doing something you weren't supposed to be able to do yet, reaching into the fabric of things. You didn't mean to. But the magic you're carrying doesn't know it's supposed to be sleeping." He seemed to reach a decision. "Harry. I need to ask you something, and I need you to try to answer it honestly, which means don't tell me what you think I want to hear. What do you know about your parents?" Harry felt the familiar dull pull in his chest that he never talked about. "They died in a car crash. I was a baby." Strange's expression went very flat, very still. It was, Harry would come to understand much later, the expression Stephen Strange wore when he was exerting significant effort not to say exactly what he was thinking. "Right," he said. "That's what you were told. It isn't true?" "No. It isn't true." He said it simply, without drama, the way you'd state a fact about the weather. "Your parents were magical. Powerful magical people. They were killed by a dark wizard named Voldemort when you were 15 months old. You survived, and the reason you survived is something we'll talk about in depth when you're older, because the full explanation requires context you don't have yet. But the short version is that your mother died protecting you, and that act, that specific, chosen sacrifice, created a protection so powerful that when Voldemort's killing curse struck you, it bounced back. Destroyed his body. Scattered his soul. Harry processed this. He was 7, but he had grown up in the kind of household where comfort and softness were in short supply, which meant he had become good at processing hard information without falling apart. It was a coping mechanism that looked, from the outside, like unusual calm. So he's gone. His body is gone. His soul isn't. He's been surviving in a diminished form, waiting to rebuild. He will try again. Strange kept his gaze level. But here is the thing, Harry, the important thing I need you to hear: you have been told a story about yourself. The boy who lived. The child of prophecy. A hero waiting to grow up and fulfill his destiny by defeating this dark wizard. He paused. That story is not the truth. The truth is that someone found a prophecy about you before you were born, decided how they wanted it to end, and then spent 15 months engineering the conditions that would make you into the exact instrument they needed. And they've been doing it ever since. Shaping the world around you, closing off the paths you might have taken, leaving only the one they built. The cupboard felt very small and very quiet. Who? Harry said. Strange looked at him steadily. A man named Albus Dumbledore. The name meant nothing to Harry. Of course it meant nothing, it was not allowed to mean anything to him yet. But something prickled at the edges of his awareness, some deep-rooted instinct that recognized the name the way you recognize a shadow you've been standing in your whole life without knowing the sun was being blocked. Is he the Dark Wizard? No. He believes he's the good one. Strange's voice was entirely neutral when he said it, which was somehow more damning than contempt would have been. That's what makes it complicated. He is not lying about wanting the wizarding world to survive. He genuinely wants it. He is simply fully committed to the idea that he is the only person capable of deciding how that survival should look. And you, in his architecture, are the key piece. The sacrifice that purifies the threat. The weapon that names itself a hero. He leaned forward slightly. He took your fate lines, Harry, and he cut them and he stitched them to a narrative he wrote. Without your consent. Without your knowledge. Before you were old enough to walk. Harry looked down at the toy soldier, whole and fixed in his lap. Can you fix it? The fate lines? Strange was quiet for a moment. Then, to Harry's surprise, he smiled, not warmly, exactly, more like a surgeon who has identified the right incision. I'm working on it. But the answer isn't me reaching in and stitching them back. The lines are yours. The power is yours. What I can do is show you what was taken, and give you the tools to take it back yourself. Harry met his eyes. Will you? That's why I'm still here instead of leaving through the tear. Strange straightened, the red cloak settling against his shoulders with that faint restless motion that Harry was already beginning to associate with something alive. I want to be clear with you, because I don't believe in softening things for children as a rule. This will be difficult. Dumbledore is not an idiot, and when he realizes something has changed in his carefully constructed plan, he will adapt. He will smile at you and mean you harm in the same breath, and he will do it with such conviction that half the time you'll doubt yourself. Strange paused. I will not lie to you and tell you it won't be frightening. But frightening and dangerous are different things, and fear is information, not a verdict. Okay, Harry said. Strange raised an eyebrow. That's it? Okay. What else should I say? Strange looked at him for another moment and then made a sound that might have been the distant cousin of a laugh. Most people argue with me for at least 10 minutes before they get there. He stood, which in the confined space required a degree of precision, and reached into a fold of his cloak. What he withdrew was a pendant, small, circular, bronze-colored, with a design etched into it that Harry couldn't quite resolve into a clear image no matter how he looked at it, like it was shifting at the periphery of comprehension. He held it out. "This is for you. Keep it with you, don't show it to the Dursleys, and don't take it off while you sleep." Harry took it. The moment it touched his palm, it warmed, not uncomfortably, just persistently, like it was acknowledging him. "What does it do?" "Right now? It listens to the ambient magic around you and begins teaching you the base language of it. Like learning to recognize a sound before you learn the word for it. By the time you're old enough for formal instruction, you won't be starting from nothing. You'll already have a foundation." Strange tilted his head. "Think of it as a head start." "A head start on what?" "On everything," Strange said, and his voice carried the particular quality of a man who is choosing his words with surgical precision because the full version would be overwhelming. "I'll come back, Harry. Not every day. Probably not every week. But I will come back, and when I do, we'll work. And I need you to understand, what I teach you is not what you'll learn at Hogwarts. What Dumbledore's world knows about magic is real and it's powerful, but it's a narrow slice of a much larger thing. I will be teaching you the larger thing." "Hogwarts," Harry repeated. The word came out strange in his mouth, like he was tasting it rather than saying it. "What's that?" "The school you'll be sent to when you're 11. In 4 years." Strange looked around the cupboard one final time, and something moved through his expression that wasn't quite pity, it was more contained than that, more purposeful, and then his face settled back into clean, composed focus. "Before I go. Is there anything you need? Right now, tonight?" Harry thought about it. It was a genuine question, offered without condescension, and it deserved a genuine answer. "More tape," he said finally. Strange blinked. Then he actually laughed, a short, real sound, surprised out of him. "More tape," he repeated. "I was trying to fix the soldier before all this happened." "The soldier is fixed. I know. But things break a lot around here." Harry looked up at him steadily. "And no one fixes them." There was a pause. Then Strange reached into his cloak again and produced what appeared to be an ordinary roll of tape, except that when Harry took it, it had that same faint warmth as the pendant. "This one won't run out," Strange said. "And things fixed with it stay fixed." Harry held it in his hand next to the pendant. "Thank you," he said, and he meant it in a way that went considerably deeper than the words. Strange nodded, once, and then he opened the tear in the air again, that same quiet harp note, that same glimpse of blue gold nowhere, and stepped through, and the cupboard was just a cupboard again. Small, dusty, smelling of rubber. But something had shifted, invisibly and permanently, the way rooms shift when something true has been said in them. Harry clipped the pendant around his neck and tucked it under his shirt. Then he carefully set the toy soldier on the shelf and lay down and thought, for the first time in his 7 years of life, about what it meant that someone had stolen something from him before he was old enough to know what theft was. He fell asleep with the pendant warm against his breastbone, and he dreamed of silver rivers running free under open sky. Strange stepped out of the sling ring portal onto the roof of the Sanctum Sanctorum, 300 feet above Bleecker Street, and he stood there for a moment with his hands at his sides and the summer night pressing warm and indifferent around him. Wong was waiting on the roof access door, holding 2 cups of tea with the expression of a man who has learned to bring reinforcements when Strange goes chasing timeline anomalies. "Well?" Wong said. The anomaly was a child. Strange took the tea without looking at it. 7 years old. Living in a cupboard under his aunt's staircase. Wong processed this. The anomaly was generated by a child in a cupboard. He wasn't supposed to be able to access the fabric of fate for another 4 years at least. The pendant of preliminary resonance, that should have accelerated his baseline by enough that when we get to actual instruction, we're not wasting time on groundwork. Strange drank. But that's secondary. And primarily? Strange turned and looked at the city below, and the clean flat line of his jaw was set in a way Wong had seen before. It was the face Strange made when someone had been doing something that they had decided, in Strange's absence, was acceptable, and Strange had arrived to correct that assessment. Someone rewrote his fate lines, Strange said. Sophisticated work. Possibly the most precise magical interference with a fate architecture I've ever encountered. They didn't just push, they replaced. They cut out the original threading and substituted their own and secured it with 7 layered anchors, 2 of which are tied to external magical objects, 1 of which is tied to the boy's own scar. His voice was even. Technically, clinically even, which was the equivalent, for Stephen Strange, of barely controlled fury. The scar itself is an anchor point, Wong. He has been made into a housing for a fragment of someone else's soul. Wong set his tea down. Furthermore, Strange continued, the fate lines that were cut, the original ones, they weren't mundane. They weren't showing me a simple human life. They were showing deep resonance. The kind of threading I've seen in sorcerers of genuine generational power. What this child was meant to be, absent interference, would have been, he stopped. Would have been what? Wong asked. Strange turned from the view. Something considerably more free than what he's been shaped into. He finished the tea. The man responsible is Albus Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Order of Merlin, Supreme Mugwump, Chief Warlock, beloved of the wizarding world, and apparently the most sophisticated fate thief I have ever encountered. What are you going to do? Teach the boy, Strange said, as if it were obvious. Properly. Everything that was taken from him, the foundation for it, the language for it. By the time Dumbledore's architecture gets to use him, he'll be the kind of person who walks into a trap and takes the whole machine apart from the inside. Wong looked at him steadily. Strange. He's 7 years old. He was 7 and he looked me in the eye and asked me if I could fix his fate lines, and when I said it would require him doing it himself, his response was, essentially, fine. Strange retrieved his cloak from the rail where it had settled. He asked me for tape, Wong. Tape. Because things broke around him and no one fixed them. Strange moved toward the door. He's going to be remarkable. He already is, which is what Dumbledore saw, which is precisely why Dumbledore did what he did. He pulled the door open. I need the complete file on Dumbledore's activities circa 1978 through 1982. Every interaction with the Potter family. The prophecy. The Fidelius charm. The night at Godric's Hollow. Everything. That's a significant amount of research, Wong said. Good thing we have 4 years, Strange said, and went inside. He went back 3 weeks later. He hadn't planned to, he'd planned to give the pendant time to settle and do its groundwork, come back in a month or 2 when Harry had a better instinctive grasp of ambient magic. But he'd been reviewing the fate line analysis and kept coming back to one specific anchor point, the one attached to the scar, and the implications of what it meant that a fragment of Voldemort's soul was living in the body of a 7-year-old, and by the 3rd night of that week he'd folded a portal and ended up in Privet Drive at 2 in the morning, standing outside the house and running a diagnostic sweep on the boy's aura from outside. The soul fragment was quiescent. Dormant. But it was there, and it was real, and it was woven into Harry's fate lines as both a passenger and an anchor. Dumbledore had used it. The piece of Voldemort's soul in Harry's scar was one of the primary threads binding Harry to his constructed destiny. The prophecy machine only worked if the Horcrux was intact. Which meant that Dumbledore's plan had always, on some level, required Harry to die. Strange stood on the pavement outside number 4 and felt something he didn't often feel anymore, a slow, cold, structural anger that had no heat in it at all, the kind that didn't dissipate but simply hardened into resolve. He didn't wake Harry that night. He went back to the sanctum and spent 3 weeks developing a technique he'd never had reason to develop before, how to extract a soul fragment from a living person's aura without damaging the native soul, the native fate lines, or the external anchoring structure that depended on the fragment being present. The last point was the difficult one, because he didn't want to alert Dumbledore by making the fragment vanish cleanly. He needed something more elegant. He needed the anchors to believe the fragment was still there while it wasn't. It was, he would later admit to Wong, the most technically demanding piece of work he had done in 15 years of being Sorcerer Supreme. He went back to the cupboard on a Thursday evening in late October, 2 months after the first visit. Harry was sitting on his mattress doing homework, actual school homework, arithmetic problems on a worksheet, and he was finishing them with the offhand speed of someone working significantly below their natural level. The pendant around his neck had a faint, barely visible shimmer to it that meant it was active, working, calibrating. Harry looked up when Strange stepped through the portal. No flinch, no alarm. Just recognition, and then, immediately, "You've been studying. You look like you get when you're working on something difficult." Strange stopped. "You've only met me once. You have a face that's easy to read once you know what to look for." Harry set down his pencil. "Did you find more things? Significant things?" Strange sat down across from him, back against the wall, legs folded with a comfort that the space didn't technically invite. "I found the mechanism they're using to anchor the constructed destiny. Part of it is in your scar." Harry's hand moved involuntarily toward the lightning bolt on his forehead, then stopped. "What's in it?" "A fragment of Voldemort's soul." A pause. "That sounds bad." "It would be, left alone." "It won't be left alone." Strange met his eyes. "I can remove it. I can remove it in a way that doesn't trigger the external monitors Dumbledore has on your aura. He'll think it's still there. And it will free up one of the major anchor points binding your real fate lines under the constructed ones." Harry was quiet for a moment, looking at him with those two steady green eyes, the ones that had seen too much nothing and turned it into a very particular kind of patience. "Does it hurt?" "No. You'll feel a cold sensation for about 3 seconds and then nothing." Strange studied him. "Any other questions? Where does the fragment go after?" Strange felt something shift in his assessment of this child, incrementally upward, for approximately the 4th time in 2 months of knowing him. "It goes into a containment vessel where it cannot cause harm and cannot reconstitute. It ceases to be a factor." He paused. "That's a very specific question for a 7-year-old to ask." "I just think it seems important to know what happens to things," Harry said simply. "Not just that they go away." Strange opened his mouth, closed it again, and then said, "Yes. Precisely so." He brought out the containment vessel, small, brass, sealed with 3 separate layers of enchantment, and held it up. "Ready?" Harry turned to face him fully. "Yes." It took 4 seconds. There was a brief tension in Harry's expression at the 3rd second, the way you look when you've held cold water in your cupped hands a moment too long, and then his face cleared and he blinked. "That's it? That's it." Strange sealed the vessel and put it away. He ran the diagnostic again. The scar's structure was unchanged to external readings, the anchoring energy still read as present. But the fragment was gone. "How do you feel?" Harry thought about it with genuine consideration. "Lighter," he said. "Like when you've been carrying a bag you forgot you were carrying and you put it down." Strange said nothing. But something in his chest shifted, something old and angular, and he spent the next hour teaching Harry the first of what would become a long series of lessons: how to feel the shape of magic before you name it, how to listen to the resonance of the world and understand what it was telling you, how intention and attention were the first and most fundamental tools in any magic, Eastern or Western, mechanical or organic. Harry listened the way Harry listened to everything, completely, quietly, with those green eyes that missed nothing, and when Strange showed him a simple demonstration of using ambient energy to alter the state of a small object, Harry tried it once, failed, tried it again with a very slight adjustment in focus, and succeeded. Strange looked at the object. Then at Harry. "You've never done that deliberately before." "I've done things like it accidentally," Harry said. "This is just the same thing but on purpose. Most adults take 3 sessions to make that distinction." Harry shrugged slightly. "I've had a lot of time to think in here." He glanced around the cupboard. Not much else to do. Strange left an hour later. He came back in November, and December, and twice in January. Each time Harry was a little sharper, the pendant's calibration a little more settled, the magical foundation a little more precisely himself rather than the smeared, redirected, conscripted version he'd been designed to be. In February, Strange arrived to find Harry had taught himself, from the pendant's ambient instruction, to perceive and identify 3 distinct types of magical residue. He was describing them matter-of-factly, without realizing that what he was describing was a skill most trained sorcerers couldn't reliably perform until their 3rd year of formal study. Strange took out his notebook. In March, he brought Harry his first formal text, not a Hogwarts text, not anything from the wizarding world's narrow curriculum, but one of the Sanctum's introductory manuscripts, translated and condensed into accessible language. Harry read it in a week and came back with questions that made Strange reshuffle his entire teaching plan. By the time summer arrived and Harry turned 8, Strange had done something he had not done since his own training under the Ancient One. He had revised his expectations of a student upwards so many times that he had stopped setting upper limits altogether. It was on Harry's 8th birthday that he found Harry sitting outside, in the garden, early morning, before any of the Dursleys were awake, cross-legged on the grass with the pendant in his hands and his eyes closed. There was no visible magic doing anything dramatic. But the air around Harry had a quality to it, a stillness that was not emptiness but presence, the kind of quiet that happens when something very large and very calm is paying attention. Strange stood at the garden's edge and watched for almost a full minute before Harry opened his eyes. "I was trying to feel the fate lines," Harry said, without preamble. "Mine specifically. You said I'd need to learn to read them myself eventually. I said that months ago. I've been thinking about it since." Harry looked down at the pendant. "I can feel something. I can't read it. But I can feel that there are layers. The ones on top feel built. The ones underneath feel like mine." He looked up. "Is that right?" Strange came and sat on the garden wall. "That's right. The built ones feel like someone else's handwriting," Harry said quietly. "You know how you can tell when someone else has written in your notebook? It's the right words but the wrong shape." He paused. "I don't like it." "You shouldn't. I want them gone." "In time," Strange said. "And by you, not by me. I can guide the technique. But you're the only one who can do the actual removal. They're your lines. Anyone else touching them risks damage." He paused. "But we're building toward it. Everything we're doing is building toward it." Harry nodded. "Accepted this. Filed it." He had an extraordinary talent for taking information that should have been devastating. Someone stole your destiny, you were designed to be a weapon, a piece of dark wizard lives in your scar, sorry, past tense now, you're going to have to reclaim your own fate at 13, and treating it not as a burden but as a project. A very serious, very important project that he intended to see through to completion. It was not that he didn't feel things. Strange had seen enough of this child's eyes to know the feeling was all there, deep and real. He had simply, by necessity, become very good at the particular skill of deciding what to do with feelings once he'd had them. Strange sometimes thought that in different circumstances, a different house, a different childhood, Harry might have been an ordinary boy who turned into an ordinary man with an ordinary life. Not worse for it, perhaps. Just smaller. And he thought about who had taken that possibility away, and what they had replaced it with, and what it meant that their replacement was being quietly, systematically dismantled by a 7-year-old in a garden who could feel the difference between someone else's handwriting and his own. "Happy birthday," Strange said. Harry looked up, surprised. People didn't generally say that to him. Dudley's birthday was a 3-day production involving presents and a cake and a trip somewhere. Harry's birthday was usually a day that happened and then ended. "Thank you," Harry said, and the genuine quality of it, small and undefended, did something Strange had not anticipated and filed away carefully. "I brought you something," Strange said, and produced a second manuscript, this one bound differently, older looking. "This one is harder. It'll take you longer." "How long?" "Most people?" 6 months. Strange handed it over. "You'll probably do it in 2. Harry took it and turned it over, examining the binding with those precise, cataloging eyes. "Strange," he said, without looking up. "Yes. When I go to Hogwarts. When Dumbledore sees me." He looked up. "Will he know something's changed?" Strange held his gaze. "Eventually. Not immediately. And when he does? He'll try to get you back on the track he built." Strange said it plainly. "He'll be kind about it. He'll probably be extraordinarily kind about it, because he's very good at that. He'll offer you things. Safety, belonging, purpose. Everything a child who grew up in a cupboard would want most." Harry looked at him steadily. And you'll know exactly what it is," Strange said, "because you'll know what your actual fate lines feel like from the ones he built, and you'll be able to tell the difference between a door that opens onto something real and a door that opens onto a set." A silence. The garden was waking up around them, birds beginning, the first sound of traffic in the distance. "Okay," Harry said, and opened the manuscript. Strange sat on the garden wall and watched a boy who had been designed to be a sacrifice read a book about the architecture of the universe, and thought that sometimes, when the world broke things badly enough, it created the conditions for something better to grow in the break. He stayed until Petunia's alarm went off inside and Harry slipped back through the garden door, pendant tucked under his shirt, manuscript hidden under the loose board beneath his mattress that Strange had reinforced 3 visits ago to be undetectable by any scan Dumbledore's monitoring charms were capable of running. The cloak settled against his shoulders, patient and alive. Strange opened the portal home, and as he stepped through he was already planning the next lesson, and the one after that, and thinking about 4 years from now when a boy with his own fate lines finally intact would walk through the doors of a school that had been built to contain him, and find that it couldn't. Chapter 2, The Shape of What Was Taken. The years between 7 and 11 were the years Harry Potter learned what he actually was. Not the boy who lived. Not the child of prophecy. Not the chosen weapon in someone else's carefully orchestrated war. Those were costumes, and Strange had shown him the stitching on the back of each one, where they'd been sewn hurriedly onto skin that belonged to something else entirely. What Harry actually was turned out to be considerably more interesting. Strange came every 3 to 4 weeks through Harry's 8th year, and every 2 to 3 weeks through his 9th, and by his 10th year was visiting almost weekly, because by then the lessons had moved beyond groundwork and into the kind of territory that required real-time guidance. The cupboard had long since become inadequate as a teaching space, not physically, though that too, but energetically. Some of what they were doing required room to move, required the ability to make a certain amount of controlled noise, required surfaces that could take a degree of ambient magical output without scorching. Strange solved this practically, the way he solved most things, which was to create a pocket space. Not a full pocket dimension, those were elaborate, expensive in terms of energy, and frankly overkill for tutoring a 10-year-old, but a folded space accessible through the cupboard door itself, contingent on Harry touching the pendant and turning the handle a specific way. Inside it was larger than outside, a stone-floored practice space, roughly the size of a school gymnasium, with no windows because windows meant light and light meant a sky and a sky meant weather and weather in a pocket space meant a whole additional layer of maintenance Strange wasn't interested in doing. The walls gave off a soft ambient glow that was easy on the eyes and didn't flicker. Harry called it the room. He spent approximately 6 hours in the room for every one spent in the actual cupboard, which meant that despite the physical reality of his living situation, his actual childhood was considerably larger than the Dursleys knew or suspected. They knew something was different about the boy that year. They had always known something was different, in the way that people who are afraid of a thing know it's there without being able to articulate exactly what they're afraid of. Vernon blustered more. Petunia watched Harry from the corners of rooms. Dudley avoided him with increasing frequency, which had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the fact that Harry had stopped flinching, and children are extraordinarily sensitive to the loss of that dynamic. Harry didn't bully Dudley back. He didn't do anything to Dudley, which was, for Dudley, somehow worse. He was simply there, and calm, and watching the world with those green eyes that had stopped apologizing for being in the room. Strange noticed the change early. He noted it the way he noted everything, factually, without editorial, and one evening in the room, while Harry was working through a particularly exacting exercise in ambient energy direction, Strange said, "You've stopped being afraid of them." Harry didn't break the exercise. The small sphere of condensed light between his palms held its shape, rotating steadily. "I was never afraid of them exactly," he said. "More like, I understood that they had power over my daily life. Food, rules, where I slept. So it made sense to manage them carefully. And now? Now I understand them better." The sphere completed its cycle and Harry released it, letting it dissolve cleanly. Good technique, no bleed, no residue. They're frightened people. They're frightened of magic, frightened of anything they can't put in a box, and I happen to be one of those things. But frightened people don't actually have the kind of power I used to assign them. They have the power to make days unpleasant. That's real, but it's bounded. He looked up at Strange. You have to know what something actually is before you know how much of your attention it deserves. Strange was quiet for a moment. How old are you again? 10. Harry picked up the manuscript on the floor beside him, the fourth one now, denser and more technical than any of the previous three, and already half annotated in Harry's small precise handwriting. Can we do the resonance chains today? I've been reading the chapter on linked anchor systems and I think I understand the mechanism, but I want to try the practice version. We can, Strange said. But first we're going to do something different. He sat down on the stone floor across from Harry, which was a signal that theory was coming. Harry set down the manuscript and gave him his full attention. I need to tell you what I've found. About Dumbledore's construction. The full picture. Harry went still in the particular way he went still when something important was arriving, not tense, just completely present. I've spent 3 years pulling this apart, Strange said. The complete architecture of what was done to you. I want to give you the whole map, because in a year you'll be walking into that school, and I want you to have every piece of information you need to navigate it without being caught by anything I didn't warn you about. He reached into his cloak and produced something he'd spent considerable time preparing, a physical representation of Harry's fate line architecture, rendered in fine luminous thread on a piece of dark cloth, 2 sets of lines in different colors, original threading in silver, constructed overlay in gold. It was, visually, extraordinary and appalling in equal measure. Harry took it and studied it in silence for nearly a full minute. The original silver lines ran in broad, natural paths, complex but organic, the way river systems are complex, following the landscape of Harry's native nature. Powerful. Deep-channeled. The kind of fate architecture that developed in people who were going to do things that mattered, not because they were told to but because the shape of who they were tended that direction naturally. The golden lines were something else entirely. Precise. Deliberate. Engineered with extraordinary technical skill to overlay the silver almost perfectly, masking it from casual observation, redirecting the major channels through 4 specific nodes. At each node, Strange had marked the anchor, a small symbol in red thread. Harry touched one of the symbols. What's this one? The prophecy, Strange said. Not the prophecy itself, prophecies are observed, not created. They're snapshots of probability. But the way Dumbledore used the prophecy, the way he built it into your constructed narrative as a fixed point, a destiny wall that prevents probability from flowing in any other direction, that's an anchor. He made the prophecy real for you by treating it as absolute truth and engineering every circumstance around you to confirm it. Strange touched the second symbol. This one was the soul fragment. Gone now. The scar anchor. Yes. Removing it didn't disrupt the visible structure, but it loosened the tension on two of the adjacent silver lines. Your original threading is already starting to reassert in minor ways. He paused. You've noticed. It wasn't a question. Harry nodded slowly. Things feel more like mine than they used to. Not completely. But more. He moved his finger to the third symbol. This one? The blood ward, Strange said. When Dumbledore placed you with your aunt, he used your mother's blood protection, which is real, powerful, and genuinely there to protect you from Voldemort, but he anchored it to you personally being bound to the property. Being required to return every summer. Being required to call it home. He tied a legitimate protection into a chain that keeps you returning to a place he controls indirectly. Strange's voice was even. The protection is real. The binding is additional. So it's like using a real wall and adding a lock, Harry said. And not mentioning the lock exists, yes. Strange touched the fourth symbol. This last one is the most subtle. It's woven into the magical core itself, the way your power is structured, the channels through which it expresses. The constructed overlay doesn't just redirect your fate lines. It constricts the bandwidth of your magical output. You are not currently working at your natural capacity. Harry looked at him. How far from it? Difficult to say precisely. Significant. Strange held his gaze. The constriction is designed to keep you powerful enough to be a credible weapon but not powerful enough to be ungovernable. It's sophisticated work. I'd be more impressed if I wasn't so angry about it. Can we remove it? Yes. And we're going to start on it today, actually. Strange took the fate line map back and folded it carefully. The technique is the resonance chains you were asking about. The chapter in the manuscript describes the general principle. The specific application is unlocking your own fourth anchor by using your native magical resonance to dissolve the external interference. He looked at Harry steadily. It will not feel like the soul fragment removal. That was an extraction, clean, external. This is more like pulling a weed from inside a wall, where the roots have grown into the mortar. It will be uncomfortable, possibly significantly, and it will take longer. But I will be here. Okay, Harry said. You're not nervous. I'm a bit nervous, Harry corrected, honestly. But I want it done. Strange looked at him for a moment. All right. Then let's begin. What followed was 3 hours of the most technically demanding work Harry had done in 3 years of training. Strange guided him through the resonance chain technique in careful increments, feel the foreign structure, map its edges, find where it meets your own threading, apply pressure not to the foreign element but to the junction, and let your native magic dissolve the adhesion rather than trying to break the constraint by force. Harry got it wrong 4 times. Each failure was informative. Strange made sure of that, turning each mistake into diagnostic data, showing Harry what the wrong approach revealed about the right one. By the second hour Harry had the correct sense of it, the specific pressure and angle, and by the third hour he was working slowly but correctly, walking his awareness along the constraint structure with the patience of someone who understood that speed here was the enemy. The fourth time he applied the correct technique to the correct junction and held it long enough, something in his chest, deep, structural, fundamental, unclenched. It was not a dramatic sensation from the outside. Strange saw the slight widening of Harry's eyes, saw the micro-expressions crossing his face too quickly to catalogue individually, saw him breathe out through his nose in a long, controlled exhale. That was all. But the diagnostic he ran afterward made him put his instruments down and run it again, because he wanted to be certain of the numbers. He was certain of them. Strange, Harry said, in a voice that was working to stay level. I know. Is that, yes? Harry raised one hand, looked at it, and then with very gentle, very deliberate intent, did something small, just a breath of ambient magic, the kind of casual output that had been routine for 3 years. The result was not small. The sphere of light that formed was 3 times the size and density of anything he'd previously produced, clean-edged and vibrating with a depth of resonance that made the air in the room feel pressurized. Harry stared at it. That's one constraint removed, Strange said quietly. There are residual elements in the 4th anchor that will clear over the next few weeks on their own, now that the main adhesion is dissolved. Your output baseline will continue adjusting upward as they do. How many constraints total? 3, Strange said. We removed 1 today. I want to space the remaining 2, your system needs time to integrate each change. Rushing it risks overcorrection. He paused. Roughly every 3 months for the remaining ones. We'll have you at full native capacity before September. September. Hogwarts. Harry released the sphere and watched it dissolve. I've been thinking about how I want to handle Hogwarts, he said. Tell me. I don't want to walk in announcing myself. Not because I'm hiding, he was emphatic about that distinction in a way that told Strange he'd been thinking about it carefully, but because I want to understand the actual state of the place before I react to it. I want to see Dumbledore's architecture from inside. All of it. The monitoring charms, the compulsion fields, the things he's built into the school itself. He paused. Is that the right instinct? Yes, Strange said. You don't demolish a building until you have the full blueprint. Especially when the building is occupied by people who don't know they're in a trap. Harry nodded slowly. Hermione Granger, he said. Strange raised an eyebrow. You've been reading the Hogwarts intake records? The pendant gave me access to some Sanctum peripheral files about 6 months ago. I don't know if that was intentional. It was, Strange said. I set the access permissions when you turned 10. You were ready. He leaned back. What about Hermione Granger? Brilliant. Muggle-born. Going to be in my year. She's the kind of person who reads everything about the world she's entering, which means she'll know Hogwarts structure better than almost any other first year, which means she'll notice faster than most when the structure doesn't match the reading. Harry met Strange sighs. She's the kind of person you want on your side when you're trying to understand a system. Strange was quiet for a moment. You're already doing strategic analysis of your peer group. I've been reading a lot, Harry said, without particular apology. Strange picked up his tea, he always brought a thermos, one of the more humanizing facts about him, and drank in silence for a moment. What about Ron Weasley? Loyal, Harry said immediately. Comes from a family that already knows the wizarding world is complicated, which means he won't be shocked when I tell him things are not what they seem. Has brothers who've already been through Hogwarts, which means he has institutional knowledge I don't. And he's going to want to be on the right side of things, it matters to him, that distinction. You've thought about this extensively. I've been in a cupboard for 4 years, Harry said, not bitterly, just accurately. I think. It's what I do. Strange smiled at that, genuine, brief, gone almost before it was there. All right. Let's talk about what Hogwarts will actually look like from the inside, because you should know what to expect before you walk in. He pulled out a folded diagram, not the Fate Line map but a schematic, architectural, overlaid with annotations in his precise handwriting. The monitoring system Dumbledore runs on the student body is extensive. He has diagnostic threads on every student's magical signature, updated in real time through proximity to the school's own enchantment network. He will know within hours of your arrival that something has shifted in your baseline, the soul fragment is gone, and even though I masked the absence, the overall profile of your aura is no longer what he calibrated against when he set you up as an infant. So he'll know something changed, Harry said. Not what? Correct. He'll investigate. He'll be careful about it. He won't alarm you or alarm you to alarm you, he'll try to understand the discrepancy quietly, and his first assumption will be that it's a natural development he didn't account for, because the alternative, that someone has been accessing his work, is a conclusion he'll resist because it requires admitting the work is visible. Arrogance, Harry said. Certainty, Strange corrected. Which is in some ways worse. He's not arrogant in the sense of being careless. He's certain, which means he constructs his world around the unquestioned premise that he is the most capable actor in it. That certainty has a blind spot. It cannot easily accommodate the possibility that someone else was both capable enough and motivated enough to find his interference and work against it. Harry filed this. What does he want from me? At school, I mean. Beyond the long-term plan. Proximity, Strange said. Trust. He will be extraordinarily kind to you. He will make you feel seen, valued, chosen, not in the mechanical chosen one prophecy sense, but personally. He is very good at making people feel that they specifically matter to him. And they do, in the sense that pieces on a board matter to the player, their welfare is relevant to the outcome. He looked at Harry. He will mean it, in his way. That's the complicated part. Harry considered this with the particular gravity he reserved for morally complex information. What do I do with that? When it's happening? You receive it honestly, Strange said. You don't perform hatred or suspicion. You let it be what it is, a man offering kindness that is also manipulation, and you respond to the kindness without surrendering to the manipulation. You can appreciate the warmth of a fire without putting your hand in it. Harry was quiet. Then, you said my original fate lines showed something. Before he cut them. What did they show? Strange was still for a moment. This was a question he'd been expecting and had been thinking about how to answer. They showed several things, he said carefully. The clear ones: exceptional magical capacity, deep native affinity for older forms of magic, not just British wizarding tradition but the same fundamental principles we've been working from. The fate lines of a genuine sorcerer in the broader sense, not just a wizard in the narrow one. He paused. They also showed openness. The kind of fate architecture that doesn't tend toward a single fixed outcome. Multiple significant paths, all genuine. A life that was going to be genuinely self-directed. And the constructed ones? One path. One outcome. One purpose. Strange met his eyes. You were made into a single-use instrument. A silence. He's going to be hard to hate cleanly, Harry said, which was not the response Strange had expected. Why? Because you said he means it. The kindness. He genuinely thinks he's doing something necessary. Harry looked down at his hands. People who are wrong and know they're wrong are easy. People who are wrong and completely certain they're right are, he stopped. Tragic, Strange said. And dangerous. Yes. So I can't just be angry at him. I have to understand him. You have to understand him, Strange agreed. Anger is fine. Anger is appropriate and it's yours. But understanding him is what will let you navigate him. He paused. The goal is not to defeat Dumbledore. The goal is to render his architecture irrelevant. To reclaim your fate lines so completely that the constructed overlay has nothing left to anchor to, and then to make choices, your choices, from your actual nature, that he cannot predict or control, because they're not coming from the narrative he wrote. Harry looked at the fate line map in Strange's hands. And Voldemort? Voldemort is a problem, Strange said, but a more straightforward one in some respects. He's powerful, dangerous, and will absolutely try to kill you given the opportunity. But he is a problem with a visible shape. His goals are understandable if not agreeable. His methods are brutal but legible. He folded the schematic. Dumbledore's danger is that his methods are invisible behind his virtue. So Voldemort is the storm and Dumbledore is the sea it happens in. Strange looked at him. That's an unusually precise metaphor. I read a lot, Harry said again, and this time Strange did laugh, properly, and Harry looked briefly, unguardedly pleased about it in the way of children who make adults laugh and aren't entirely sure how they did it. They worked for another 2 hours after that, the resonance chain technique in broader applications, followed by a session on magical perception that Strange had been building toward for months. By the time they finished, Harry was tired in the productive way, the way that meant something real had happened, and he sat with his back against the room's wall and drank the tea Strange had brought. He always brought 2 cups, which Harry had stopped remarking on approximately 6 months into it becoming routine. Strange, Harry said. You're not doing this because of the timeline anomaly anymore. He said it without accusation, simply as an observation. Or not only that. Strange drank his tea and did not answer immediately. The ambient glow of the room sat between them, comfortable in the silence. No, Strange said, finally. Not only that. Harry nodded, as if this was exactly what he'd expected to hear. He didn't push it further. He didn't need to. Some things were understood more completely in the not saying, and Harry Potter, raised in a house where love was mostly notable by its absence, had become extraordinarily good at recognizing it in its more unconventional forms. He went to sleep that night in his cupboard with the 2 remaining constraints still sitting in his magical architecture, patient as stones, and thought about September. The second constraint came out in March, 2 months before Harry turned 11. It was faster than the first. Harry knew the technique now, knew the sensation of his own threading versus the foreign structure, knew how to apply pressure at the junction with the specific quality of sustained, non-aggressive intent that the work required. Strange was there, monitoring and ready to intervene, but he didn't need to intervene. It lasted 40 minutes. When it cleared, Harry sat with his eyes closed for a long moment, and the air in the room did something it had never done before, it responded. The ambient glow brightened and then steadied, and the stone floor hummed, faint and low, like a sound at the edge of hearing. Strange was completely still. Harry opened his eyes. How much left? 1 more constraint, Strange said. And then some residual clearing. But Harry, he stopped. What? Strange held up the diagnostic instrument. The readings it was showing were not, technically, possible for an 11-year-old. They were not, by the current catalogue of the Sanctum's records on early magical development, possible for most adults. Your baseline is currently reading at a level that would place you in roughly the 94th percentile of trained sorcerers globally, he said, in the flat, precise voice he used when he wanted to convey information without adding emotional charge to it. With 1 constraint still in place. Harry looked at him. 94th. Yes. Of trained sorcerers. Of trained sorcerers. Not trained wizards in the British tradition specifically, though by that metric the number would be higher. Strange set the instrument down. I want to be clear with you about what this means practically. When you walk into Hogwarts in September, you will be the single most magically powerful person in the building, including the teachers, including Dumbledore, and that is with 1 constraint still in place. He paused. Dumbledore is powerful. I want you to understand that I'm not saying he isn't. He is the most powerful wizard in the British tradition and one of the most capable in the world. What I'm saying is that your nature, which he spent considerable effort suppressing, exceeds what he built the cage to contain. Harry was quiet for a long moment. Don't make that face, Strange said. What face? The one where you're thinking about responsibility and whether you should be less of what you are to make other people comfortable. Harry looked up. I wasn't. You were starting to. I was thinking about whether it changes how I approach things, Harry said, which was distinct and he clearly felt the distinction mattered. If I can do more than I knew, that doesn't mean I should do more. It means I have more options. More options means more careful choices, not less. Strange considered him for a moment. Yes, he said. Exactly that. But I'm not going to pretend to be less than I am, Harry added. I'll know what I'm doing and why. But I won't hide it. Good, Strange said, and meant it completely. The third constraint came out in June, 3 months before Hogwarts. Harry did it alone, in the room, at 2 in the morning when the rest of the house was sleeping, with the diagnostic Strange had left him running on the wall like a readout. He sent Strange a message through the pendant's communication link, a capability it had developed somewhere around Harry's 9th year that neither of them had entirely planned for but both had found practical, when it was done. Strange's reply came back in 30 seconds, readings. Harry sent the numbers. Strange's second message took slightly longer. Those are your full baseline numbers. All 3 constraints cleared. How do you feel? Harry sat in the middle of the room's stone floor, the ambient glow humming steadily around him, and he felt enormous. Not in a frightening way. The way a river feels enormous when you're standing in it rather than looking at it from a bank, present, powerful, but also simply natural. The way a thing feels when it is finally, completely, allowed to be itself. He sent back, like me. Strange's third message was the longest pause, and then just, good. Sleep. We'll work in the morning. 3 weeks before his Hogwarts letter arrived, Strange came with Wong. This was unusual enough that Harry took note of it immediately. In 4 years of visits, Strange had always come alone. Wong's presence meant something was being communicated by the company itself. Wong was shorter than Harry had pictured, broader across the shoulders, with a face that operated on a different economy of expression than Strange's, where Strange's micro-expressions were fast and involuntary, Wong's were chosen, curated, offered deliberately. He looked at Harry for about 3 seconds with the directness of someone taking a genuine measure, and then said, "You're taller than I expected." Strange said the same thing when we met, Harry said. In the other direction. Wong looked at Strange. Strange looked at the ceiling. Wong's mouth twitched once and was still again. He showed me your diagnostic readings, Wong said. 3 years of them. And I wanted to meet you, Wong said simply. Because Strange has been building something here for 4 years, and I'm one of the people responsible for the sanctum's stability, and what gets built in the sanctum's orbit is my business. He paused. Also I wanted to see the cupboard. Harry gestured at the door behind him. It's approximately 8 square feet of dust and disappointment. And yet you've spent 4 years turning it into a sanctum annex, Wong said. Strange told me about the room. The room was Strange's design. The room's current resonance profile is yours, Wong said. Stone floors don't hum unless someone has been spending significant time in them working magic at a serious level. That hum is a record. Like tree rings. He paused. He's also been talking about you for 4 years, which is unprecedented. He does not talk about students. Strange, who had been examining the wall with concentrated attention, said, Wong. I'm being honest, Wong said. You're being deliberately discomfiting. I am, Wong agreed, without apparent regret. He looked back at Harry. He's going to send you into a school that's been built as a controlled environment for a child whose fate was stolen before he could walk. He's going to send you in with 4 years of preparation and a magical baseline that would embarrass most sanctum staff. And then he's going to stay outside the school's wards and watch. He paused. How do you feel about that? Harry looked at Strange, who had turned away from the wall and was watching him now with that careful, level attention. I think, Harry said slowly, that staying outside is the right call. If Strange came in, Dumbledore would know immediately that someone powerful had been working with me. The whole point of the next phase is understanding the architecture from inside it. If Strange walks in beside me, I lose the element of information advantage. He paused. And Strange going to Hogwarts uninvited would probably cause a significant international incident. Wong actually laughed at that, genuine, warm, surprised out of him the same way Strange had been surprised into laughter once, and Harry thought that there was something to learn from the fact that both of them laughed most genuinely when he was precise about something absurd. Furthermore, Harry added, Strange will be reachable through the pendant. He's not absent. He's just not visible. He looked at Strange directly. That's the right way to do it. Strange held his gaze for a moment. Yes, he said. It is. Wong looked between the two of them with an expression that was doing a very good impression of neutrality while containing something warmer underneath it. Right, he said. I brought tea. He produced a thermos from somewhere in his robes, larger than Strange's, which was in itself a statement, and 3 cups, and they sat in the room with its humming stone floor, and Wong told Harry about the sanctum's history, and Strange occasionally corrected details that Wong was, Harry suspected, getting wrong on purpose just to make Strange participate. It was, Harry thought, the closest thing to a normal afternoon he'd had in years. Later, when Wong had gone back through the portal and it was just the two of them again, Strange leaned against the room's wall and looked at Harry with the directness he'd always used, from the first visit, the quality of looking that was never performance. September, Strange said. September, Harry agreed. When you walk through those doors, you will know more about the true nature of magic than any student in that school's history. You will be operating at a power level that will likely be visible to other sensitive practitioners in the building within the first week. Dumbledore will begin noticing discrepancies in his monitoring almost immediately. Strange paused. And despite all of that, it will still be hard sometimes. Because you'll be 11 years old, in a new place, surrounded by people who know things about their world that you're still learning, and there is no amount of preparation that makes that part not real. Harry looked at him. Is that your version of telling me it's okay to find things difficult? It's my version of telling you that difficulty and inadequacy are not the same thing, Strange said. You will encounter things you don't know. That's not failure. That's the correct condition for learning. Harry nodded slowly. Okay. The one thing I need from you, Strange paused, is that you contact me when something significant happens. Not because I can fix it from outside. But because you deserve to not be navigating all of this alone. Harry looked at him for a long moment. The room hummed around them, years of practice and work and accumulated understanding in its stones. I know, Harry said quietly. That's different from how things used to be. Strange didn't say anything. But his expression did something that Strange's expressions very rarely did, which was that it came entirely undone for a moment, the precision and the calibration and the Sorcerer Supreme's careful neutrality, and what was underneath was exactly what it was and needed no analysis. Harry picked up his manuscript and found his page, because that was what you did when something important had been understood, you filed it and moved forward, because there was always more to do and the doing was how you honored what you'd found. But he was smiling when he read, and Strange, sitting across the room with his thermos and his perpetually restless cloak, did not mention it. The Hogwarts letter arrived on a Tuesday. Harry held it and felt the enchantments on the parchment, monitoring threads, identity confirmation, the faint echo of the school's own magic reaching out and confirming his signature. He also felt, underneath all of that, the whisper of Dumbledore's specific magical fingerprint, woven into the letter's construction the way a craftsman's mark is pressed into wax. Watching. Assessing. The first move in a game the old man thought he was still running. Harry opened the letter and read it and smiled, and it was a different kind of smile from the one that had been on his face in the room. This one was the smile of someone who has spent 4 years learning the layout of a maze and has just been handed the invitation to walk in. Chapter 3, The Castle with Teeth. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock on a bright September morning, and Harry Potter stood on platform 9 3/4 for about 30 seconds before he started cataloging everything wrong with it. Not wrong in the sense of dangerous, wrong in the sense of constructed. The platform had an energy to it that he'd learned, over 4 years of training, to identify as intentional ambience. A mood-setting enchantment, layered so subtly into the architecture that most people would simply feel it as atmosphere, the excitement, the sense of occasion, the specific emotional register of belonging to something magical and wonderful. Most of the families pressing around him were breathing it in without knowing they were breathing it, and their faces showed it, that soft collective uplift. Harry breathed it in too and catalogued it as data. The train itself was genuine, old, well-maintained, carrying the resonance of decades of students in every compartment. Some things were real and the train was real. He found an empty compartment and put his trunk up and sat down, and 4 minutes later the door slid open and a boy with red hair and a smudge of something on his nose looked in with the uncomplicated directness of someone who needed a seat and had decided this was the one. "Everywhere else is full," Ron Weasley said. "Can I?" "Yes," Harry said. "Sit down." Ron sat down. He looked at Harry. Harry looked at him. There was a brief mutual assessment of the kind that children do faster and more honestly than adults, and then Ron said, "You're Harry Potter." "Yes." "Right." Ron absorbed this. "I'm Ron Weasley." "I know. You have 5 brothers and 1 sister, your dad works at the Ministry in the Misuse of Muggle Artifacts office, and your family is considered blood traitor by about a third of the old wizarding families because of your general position on Muggle equality, which the same third of old wizarding families would describe as insufficiently traditional and I would describe as correct." Ron stared at him. "How do you know all that?" "I read," Harry said, and then thought he'd perhaps led with too much and walked it back slightly. "I've been reading everything I could find about the wizarding world since I found out I was magical. Your family comes up in recent history fairly often. Mostly positive." Ron's expression, which had been startled, recalibrated into something more comfortable. "Mum said you'd have grown up not knowing much about it. Being raised by Muggles." "I knew less than I should have," Harry said, which was true and also thoroughly understated. "It's been an interesting 4 years." Ron laughed at that, genuinely, the easy laugh of someone who found things funny without needing permission for it. "Yeah, I bet." He stretched his legs out and reached into his robes and produced a lump of something wrapped in wax paper. "Want some?" "Mum makes corned beef," Harry said, because he could smell it. Ron blinked. "Yeah. She always makes corned beef. I keep telling her I don't really." He stopped. "How did you know that from smelling it?" "Strong nose," Harry said, which was not the complete explanation but was sufficient. He accepted half the sandwich. "It was very good." He said so, and Ron's face did the particular softening of someone who loves their mother and is slightly embarrassed about how much. The compartment door slid open again 20 minutes into the journey. Hermione Granger came in already talking, the way people do when they've been composing a sentence in their heads and don't fully register that they've opened their mouth. "Have either of you seen a toad? A boy named Neville has lost one and I've been helping him look," but she stopped. Looked at Harry. Something moved rapidly through her expression, recognition, recalibration, a quick internal reorganization. "You're Harry Potter." "Everyone keeps establishing that," Harry said. "Yes. Sit down if you want." Hermione sat down and her eyes went immediately to the book in Harry's bag, one of Strange's manuscripts, the 5th one, which he'd tucked in almost as reflex. Her expression sharpened. "That's not a standard school text." "No." "What is it?" "Advanced theory." Harry didn't elaborate immediately, watching her. She had, in person, the same quality he'd noticed in her file, the absolute forward-leaning engagement of someone who was always about 3 thoughts ahead of the conversation and was working to slow down enough to have it. "What have you read?" "Everything on the Hogwarts list. And the supplementary texts from Flourish and Blots that they don't officially recommend but that a helpful shop assistant told me about. And the historical section of A History of Magic, which I found more useful than the edition on the curriculum because it's the 1953 printing which has 3 additional chapters on." She stopped. "Sorry. I talk too much when I'm excited." "You talk the right amount," Harry said. "Ron, she's right about the 1953 printing. Ron looked between them with the expression of a person who has gotten onto a train and found himself in a slightly different country. "Right," he said. "I'll take your word for it." Hermione looked at Harry with what he recognized as careful, measuring attention, the kind that matched his own, that was taking him apart gently to understand what he was made of. "You've had private instruction," she said. "What makes you say that? The book in your bag is not available through any standard magical supplier in Britain. I would know, I checked. And the way you're sitting, you look like someone who's been in a classroom a lot, but a very specific kind of classroom. Not a school. One-on-one." She paused. "Am I wrong?" "No," Harry said, and decided in that moment that Hermione Granger had earned a longer version of the truth than he'd been planning to give anyone for at least the first month. He wouldn't give her everything, not yet, some things needed time and built trust, but she'd earned more than nothing. "I had a mentor. Starting from when I was 7. He found me and taught me." He paused. "The wizarding world as taught at Hogwarts is a narrow slice of a much larger thing. He taught me the larger thing." Hermione stared at him. "How much larger?" "Significantly." Her eyes moved to the manuscript again. "Can I look at that?" Harry handed it over. She opened it, read for a moment, read for another moment, and then looked up at him with an expression that was trying very hard to be composed and was not quite managing it. "This is referencing magical frameworks that predate the International Statute of Secrecy by approximately 3,000 years. "Yes. And you're reading it as," she flicked through, "revision." "Third read-through," Harry said. "I annotate as I go." Hermione closed the manuscript and handed it back with the careful reverence of someone returning something sacred. "I have so many questions," she said. "I know," Harry said. "Let's start with Hogwarts specifically, because that's immediately relevant, and I want your read on something." Ron leaned forward despite himself. He had the self-awareness, Harry was already seeing, to know when he was out of his depth technically, and the confidence to be interested anyway rather than defensive. "What something?" Ron said. "The school has a layered enchantment structure that goes significantly beyond what's described in a history of magic," Harry said. "I want to know if either of you feels anything unusual about the ambient atmosphere when we arrive. Don't look for anything specific, just note what you feel emotionally and whether it seems proportionate to the actual situation." Hermione's eyes narrowed. "You're asking us to look for compulsion fields." "I'm asking you to use your own judgment and tell me what it tells you," Harry said. "The second part doesn't work if I tell you what to look for." Hermione opened her mouth and then, visibly, chose to trust him. "All right," she said. Ron was looking at Harry with an expression that had moved past startled and settled into something more certain. "You're not what anyone said you'd be," he said. "What did they say I'd be?" "Famous." "A bit, I don't know." "Carried on about." He paused. "My brothers made it sound like you'd probably be full of yourself." "I'll try to disappoint them," Harry said, and Ron laughed again, and that was the moment, really, the locking in of something that would prove harder to break than either of them would ever quite articulate to the other. The lake crossing that evening, the boats, the first view of Hogwarts rising against the dark sky, Harry let himself feel it, because it was genuinely extraordinary, because he was 11 years old and this place was real and old and enormous and lit against the night like something out of the stories he'd had to find for himself in library books since the Dursleys had never once read to him. He let the wonder be real. And underneath the wonder, he felt the castle's enchantment network the way you feel a large weather system when you're sensitive to pressure, deep, pervasive, complex, and in several places pointed at the students filing through the entrance doors in a direction that was not purely educational. He catalogued it and kept walking. The Sorting Hat was, to Harry's magical senses, extraordinary. Ancient in the way that the Sanctum's oldest texts were ancient, not merely old but saturated, every thread of fabric carrying decades of memory and judgment, a genuine intelligence built from accumulated experience. When it dropped over his eyes and the great hall disappeared, he felt it reach for him with the same professional assessment he associated with Strange doing a diagnostic. Then the hat went very still. "Well," it said, inside his head, with a quality of voice that was not young or old but both and neither simultaneously. "I haven't felt anything like this in quite some time." "I'd hope not," Harry thought back. "Gryffindor, obviously," the hat said, with a tone suggesting this was self-evident and slightly beside the point. "But that's not what's interesting. What's interesting is that you already know what you're walking into. Most children come to me confused or frightened or ambitious. You came prepared. I had a good teacher." "You had an extraordinary teacher," the hat corrected, "and you were an extraordinary student, which is the only reason the teaching worked. Do you know what you intend to do with it?" "Yes." "And Dumbledore?" Harry felt the hat's old awareness brush over the constructed fate lines and the cleared spaces where constraints had been, and there was a quality to its silence that was not casual. "He did thorough work," the hat said, finally. "He did," Harry agreed. "I did more thorough work undoing it." "Gryffindor," the hat announced, and the hall erupted, and Harry walked to the table and sat down and nodded at the people congratulating him and filed the hat's last thought, "Good luck, boy, you'll need less of it than most, and more of it than that," into the growing catalogue of information about the castle he was already building. He felt Dumbledore's attention on him across the great hall before he'd even reached for his fork. It was not hostile, it was warm, in fact, the way a bright light is warm even when it's too bright to look at directly. The old man's magical signature reached across the hall in something that was not quite a scan, more like a greeting offered in magical rather than verbal language, the automatic recognition pulse of a very powerful wizard taking note of another's presence. Harry received it politely and gave back exactly the signature Dumbledore expected, the profile he'd been monitoring since infancy, the boy he'd engineered, the resonance he would recognize. The work Strange had done on masking the removed soul fragment and the cleared constraints extended to the surface-level aura. Dumbledore would feel what he expected to feel. What Harry felt from Dumbledore was fascinating and complicated in the exact way Strange had predicted. Genuine warmth. Real care, of the particular kind that coexists comfortably with use. The magical signature of a man who was, in his own way, entirely sincere, and entirely, architecturally convinced that his sincerity licensed his methods. Harry ate his dinner and talked to Ron about Quidditch and answered Hermione's questions about magical theory and did not look at Dumbledore again that evening. He didn't need to. He'd gotten what he needed from one pulse. The castle revealed itself over the following 2 weeks the way cities reveal themselves to someone paying attention, not all at once, but in accumulations, each day adding layers to the previous day's map. Harry walked every corridor he was allowed into and several he wasn't, not out of rebellion but out of methodology. He noted the monitoring charms at the staircases, the subtle redirection enchantments around certain doors, the places where the castle's own ancient magic and Dumbledore's more recent addition sat in the same space like two different conversations happening in one room. The castle itself was, Harry thought, not entirely Dumbledore's. The old magic underneath was something different, older, more neutral, more genuinely protective in the unconditional sense rather than the managed sense. Hogwarts the building had its own character and that character was not manipulation. Dumbledore had simply built inside it. Classes were, academically, manageable. Harry had the good sense to perform at a level that was impressive without being inexplicable, excellent results, evidently gifted, the kind of student who had clearly prepared thoroughly and had perhaps unusual natural talent. He did not demonstrate anything that would require an explanation he wasn't ready to give. He helped Hermione when she wanted to discuss theory beyond the curriculum, which was constantly, and Ron when Ron was willing to be helped with transfiguration, which was intermittently. Hermione had noticed the compulsion fields on their second day, without Harry having to point at them. She'd come to breakfast with a look on her face that Harry recognized as someone running a difficult calculation against a preferred answer, and she'd sat down next to him and said, very quietly, "There are mood-influencing enchantments layered into the Great Hall's ceiling structure." "Yes," Harry said. that's not disclosed anywhere. Not in the prospectus, not in a history of magic, no, Harry said. It wouldn't be. Hermione stared at her porridge. Who put them there? The current headmaster, I believe. Though the oldest layers might predate him. Harry poured his pumpkin juice. The ones in the Great Hall are mild. They're mostly just reinforcing house spirit and general positive effect toward the school itself. The ones in the corridors near the headmaster's office are more directional. Hermione looked at him with an expression that was equal parts horrified and analytical. You've mapped them. I've started mapping them, Harry said. I'll have a more complete picture by the end of the month. Harry. She lowered her voice further. Are you saying that the headmaster of our school is running unauthorized compulsion enchantments on students? I'm saying that someone with significant authority and technical capability has built a monitoring and mood management system into the school's enchantment network, and that several elements of it are directional toward specific outcomes that benefit the headmaster's institutional interests. He met her eyes. I'm saying that this does not mean every teacher is complicit, or that Hogwarts is entirely unsafe, or that Dumbledore is without genuine positive intentions toward the student body. I'm saying that there is a structure here that operates below the level of what most people notice, and that knowing about it is better than not knowing. Hermione sat with this for a moment. Ron should know, she said. Yes, Harry said. Tonight, if you want. I was planning to tell him this week anyway. Ron's reaction, when they told him in the corner of the common room that evening with a muffliato around them, which Harry cast so casually that Ron did a double-take at the nonverbal non-wand execution of it, was to sit very still for a full 30 seconds and then say, right, so Dumbledore's a bit complex, Harry said. I was going to say dodgy, Ron said. But all right. He paused. The twins always said there was something, they said the castle does things sometimes that feel like being nudged. Fred thought it was the house ghosts. George thought it was something in the food. He looked at Harry. Does Dad know? People at the ministry? I don't know who knows, Harry said honestly. But Dumbledore has significant institutional authority across multiple oversight bodies, which limits the mechanisms by which someone who does know could act on it. So what do we do? Ron said. We learn everything we can, Harry said. We stay useful to the school's actual educational function, which is genuinely valuable. We don't make enemies unnecessarily. And we pay attention. He paused. Also there's a chamber on the third-floor corridor that Dumbledore specifically told everyone not to go into, which means there's something in there worth understanding. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. Of course, Hermione said, in a tone of profound resignation that was entirely undermined by the fact that she was already thinking about it. The third-floor corridor turned out to contain a three-headed dog the size of a small house, which was guarding a trapdoor, which Harry identified within 4 days of the term beginning as the staging ground for something Dumbledore had arranged deliberately. The Philosopher's Stone, Nicholas Flamel's stone, moved from Gringotts to the school, was below the trapdoor, surrounded by a series of obstacle enchantments that were, Harry assessed, calibrated to be penetrable by a specific skill set. Namely, the skill set of a small group of talented first years. He told Hermione and Ron about the stone at the end of October, because by then he'd cross-referenced everything and was certain of the picture. They were in the room of requirement, which Harry had found in week 2 by walking past the 7th-floor corridor 3 times genuinely wishing for a private space that had no monitoring enchantments, and Hermione was pacing in the way she paced when a conclusion she disliked had proven itself correct. He's using the stone as bait, she said. Yes. For what? Something wearing Professor Quirrell, Harry said, has been carrying Voldemort's residual presence since before the school year began. I noticed it the first week. He'd felt it immediately, the dark resonance, thin and desperate and parasitic, overlaid on the nervous young teacher. Not a full return. A possession. A survival mechanism. He's been trying to reach the stone since September. Dumbledore knows he's trying. The obstacle course isn't protection, it's a funnel. A funnel for what? Ron said. For me, Harry said. Or rather, for the version of me Dumbledore expects. A brave, talented, loyal Gryffindor who would go after the stone heroically because someone threatened it, trip through the obstacles using natural talent and friendship, and arrive at the end to face Voldemort and either defeat him or, he stopped. Or what? Ron said, and his voice had the particular flat quality of someone who already knows and doesn't want to be right. Or die trying, Harry said, which in Dumbledore's architecture is also an acceptable outcome, because the prophecy isn't particular about how Voldemort is ultimately defeated, only that the encounter be initiated. He said it without bitterness. Just precision. He's been arranging the encounters all along. Each year of school was always going to contain one direct engagement between me and whatever remained of Voldemort, staged with just enough danger to be formative, just enough support to be survivable, escalating annually until the final confrontation. Ron was very quiet. Hermione had stopped pacing. Right, Ron said. So what are we doing instead? Harry looked at them. We're going to let it play out through December, because I want to see exactly how Quirrell attempts the stone and what obstacles stop him, so I have the complete layout. And then we're going to solve it before Quirrell does, and I'm going to deal with Voldemort in a way that doesn't follow Dumbledore's script. Deal with him how? Hermione said carefully. Voldemort's current form is a possessing fragment, not his full soul, which is spread across multiple Horcrux objects. He can't reconstitute from this fragment alone. What he needs is the stone's elixir of life to rebuild a body strong enough to survive while he recovers his full power. Harry paused. If I deny him the stone and deal with the fragment itself, he is set back years. Not defeated permanently, that requires addressing the Horcruxes, but significantly delayed and weakened. The Horcruxes, Hermione repeated, and by her tone she knew the term and its implications from her reading. Yes. We'll get to those. That's not this year's problem. Harry looked at them both steadily. Tonight's problem is that I need to contact my mentor, and I want you both to know that I'm doing it, because I don't do things behind your backs. He touched the pendant and reached through the communication link, and Strange's response was, as always, fast. Stone situation resolved? I have the complete picture. Quirrell is carrying Voldemort, a fragment, possessing. He'll move for the stone around Christmas. Your plan? I handle it. Not following Dumbledore's funnel. My way. A pause. Your way meaning? Efficient. Strange's response had a quality that Harry had learned to recognize as the sorcerer equivalent of a snort. Don't be clever about it. Be clean. I'll be both. Of course you will. Are Granger and Weasley with you? Yes. Good. Another pause. Harry. Quirrell's body is saturated with dark magic. Don't touch him with bare hands. Harry looked at his hands. Filed this. Understood. And afterward, Dumbledore will want to speak with you. Hospital wing, probably. Solicitous and concerned. I know. What will you tell him? Harry thought about it. The truth, minus everything that matters. This pause was the longest. Then, that's exactly right. I'll be at the boundary of the wards if you need me. Harry felt, through the pendant's communication link, the particular quality of Strange's presence, the focused, steady weight of someone who trusted you completely and was therefore more frightening than someone who didn't, because trust from someone that capable meant they genuinely believed you could handle it. He closed the link. Ron was watching him with the expression he'd developed over the past 2 months for moments when Harry did things that shouldn't be possible and didn't bother explaining the mechanism. It was an accepting expression, mostly. Occasionally odd. Never frightened. So, Ron said. Christmas, then. Christmas, Harry confirmed. The night he chose was the 23rd of December, when the castle was half empty and the remaining students were concentrated in the common rooms and the corridors near the Great Hall. Harry had watched Quirrell's patterns for 3 months and knew he would move before the holidays ended. He moved first. He went alone, which he discussed with both Ron and Hermione and which they'd objected to and then accepted when he explained his reasoning. Whatever he needed to do in the chamber below the trapdoor, he needed freedom of movement and no one else in the line of fire. Ron and Hermione were positioned in the corridor 2 floors above with a communication mirror Harry had assembled from components in the room, another of Strange's peripheral lessons, practical and unassuming and now saving lives. The obstacles were interesting. Sprout's devil's snare, he walked through it, sending a pulse of warm focused energy through the roots that convinced them, chemically and magically, that they were in direct sunlight. They released. Flitwick's winged keys, he didn't bother with a broomstick, simply reached for the correct key with a precise application of directional force that had it in his hand in 4 seconds. McGonagall's chess set, he looked at it for about 30 seconds, identified the winning configuration, animated all 16 of his pieces simultaneously with coordinated intent, and had the board cleared in 2 minutes. Snape's potion riddle, genuine intellectual work, the best obstacle in the sequence, and he took a moment to appreciate the elegance of it before selecting the correct bottle. The mirror room was last. The mirror of Eriste stood in the center of the chamber and the stone was already in it, Dumbledore's final trap, the only one that genuinely required the specific character he'd designed Harry to have. Only someone who wanted to find the stone but not use it. It was clever. He could respect the cleverness while also recognizing it as another design test, another corridor in the engineered narrative. Quirrell was there already, standing before the mirror with the frustrated, desperate bearing of a man who sees what he wants and cannot reach it. Harry walked into the chamber and Quirrell spun and pointed his wand, and then, because Harry's presence radiated something that was difficult to hide at full baseline power in an enclosed space, hesitated. "The boy," said the voice from the back of Quirrell's head, cold and very still. "Yes," Harry said. "Hello." There was a pause. "You're not afraid," Voldemort said. "Of you specifically, in your current state?" "No." Harry looked at Quirrell's hand, which still held the wand, and noted that the dark magic saturating the professor's body was thin and growing thinner. The possession was costing both of them significantly. "I know what you are, what's happened to you, what you want. I know about the Horcruxes." He said it simply, watching the cold presence behind Quirrell's eyes calibrate. "I'm not here to fight you, as such." "Then you're here to give me the stone," Voldemort said. "No," Harry said. "I'm here because I wanted to see this directly." The great dark wizard, currently housed in the back of a nervous professor's head, spending months trying to steal a rock from a school full of children because it's the only way to rebuild a body. He tilted his head slightly. "That's what Dumbledore's war reduced you to." Something moved through the presence behind Quirrell's eyes, cold, old, controlled fury. "You will give me the stone, or I will kill you." "You will try," Harry said, pleasantly, "and it will go very badly for you." He looked at Quirrell. "For what it's worth, Professor, I'm sorry. You were used." Quirrell threw the killing curse and Harry stepped sideways in the specific kind of not-quite movement that he'd practiced for 3 years in the room, the kind that didn't dodge the curse so much as removed the person from the spatial coordinates the curse expected to find, a fraction of a second's precise displacement that looked, to anyone watching, less like a dodge and more like the curse had simply missed. Then Harry crossed the distance between them in 3 steps and put his hand, not bare, covered with a thin layer of concentrated protective energy that he'd been maintaining since entering the chamber, one of the first practical defensive techniques Strange had taught him, against the side of Quirrell's face. The effect was immediate and extraordinary. Harry felt the dark fragment recoil from him, not from his touch specifically, though that helped, but from the quality of his magical resonance at full baseline, which was to the parasitic Voldemort fragment what sunlight is to things that grow in darkness. The fragment didn't have the strength to maintain the possession against that kind of sustained contact. It came apart at its edges. Quirrell collapsed. The fragment screamed, not with a voice, more like a pressure, a sudden violent dissonance in the magical field of the room, and then it dispersed. Not destroyed. Dispersed. A fragment of Voldemort's actual soul couldn't be destroyed this way, but it could be scattered, set back years, forced to find a new and more difficult method of consolidation. Harry stood in the silence that followed and looked at Quirrell, who was breathing, which was better than the alternative, though his prognosis was not excellent. He retrieved the stone from the mirror, which showed him, in the 2 seconds he spent looking at it, not the stone but something else, a flash of silver fate lines running clear and unobstructed under an open sky, and a tall thin figure standing at some distance that was not close enough to be present but not far enough to be gone. He looked away before it could hold him. He sent a pulse through the pendant. Done. Strange response, Quirrell. Alive. Fragment dispersed. He needs medical attention. Dumbledore will be there in 4 minutes. He's been monitoring all night. I know, Harry sent. Get away from the boundary. Don't let him see you. A pause. Be careful what you say. I know what I'm doing. He set the stone on the floor in the middle of the chamber, visible, retrievable. He sat down beside Quirrell and waited, and when Dumbledore swept through the door 2 minutes later with the specific energy of someone who has been watching and timing their entrance, Harry looked up at him with the expression of a very tired, very frightened 11-year-old who had done something brave and extraordinary and was deeply relieved to see an adult. He had not had to manufacture the tired. The frightened he managed by thinking about something real, the 3 years in the cupboard before Strange, the nights when the Dursleys' house felt genuinely inescapable, the specific quality of that old dread. He brought it up like a color on a palette and let it sit in his face, and Dumbledore saw it and his entire bearing shifted into something warm and present and genuinely kind. He was exactly what Strange had described. The warmth was real. Harry let himself receive it and kept his hands in his lap. "My dear boy," Dumbledore said, kneeling beside him with an ease that belied his age, those blue eyes full of something that was not performance. "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so," Harry said. "Quirrell, he needs help. He will receive it." Dumbledore looked at the stone on the floor and then at Harry, and something moved through those famous eyes, assessment, rapid and skilled, the calculation of a man recalibrating. He was noting the discrepancy. The disparity between the result and the expected method. A first year had walked through the entire obstacle course, dispersed a Voldemort fragment, and was sitting cross-legged on the floor of the chamber looking tired rather than traumatized. "How did you manage the obstacles alone?" Dumbledore asked, and it was a gentle question, a caring question, and also a diagnostic. "Mostly luck," Harry said. "And thinking carefully." He met Dumbledore's eyes. "I got through the chess board because I've played with my cousin a lot." He hadn't. But the explanation was right for the profile. "And the plant, Professor Sprout taught us about Devil's Snare last week." "I just remembered." Dumbledore held his gaze for a moment longer than the casual conversation required. "Of course," he said. "Very quick thinking." "The stone," Harry said. "Quirrell wanted it for Lord Voldemort," Dumbledore said. "Yes. I know." He picked up the stone, and something in the way he held it was final, decided, a man who has already determined what happens next. "Nicholas will understand that it must be destroyed. It has served its purpose here." Harry said nothing. He watched Dumbledore pocket the stone and noted precisely which pocket, noted the containment enchantment cast over it, noted the smoothness of the motion, a man who had planned this, who was not improvising the stone's fate but implementing a decision already made. Dumbledore offered him a hand up and Harry took it, and as they walked out of the chamber together, the old man's hand warm on his shoulder, Harry felt the full complicated weight of what Strange had told him, the care and the use, the warmth and the architecture, the genuine love for a piece on a board. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said, as they reached the stairs. "Yes, Harry?" Thank you for trusting students enough to leave the protection of the stone partly in our hands. He said it with the guileless gratitude of someone who had no idea what he was really saying. It made me feel like what we do here matters. Dumbledore stopped. He looked at Harry with those blue eyes, and just for a fraction of a second, less than a second, barely a heartbeat, something else was there. Something that was not warmth and not calculation but a third thing, surprised and very still. A man glimpsing, perhaps, that the board had moved in a way he hadn't authorized. Then it was gone, and he smiled, and it was the most genuine smile Harry had ever seen on anyone's face. It does matter, Dumbledore said. More than you know, Harry. More than you know. Harry smiled back. They walked up the stairs together, the old man and the boy who was not what the old man thought he was, and the castle hummed around them with its dual nature, ancient and neutral underneath, constructed and careful on top, and Harry thought about the river of the fate lines on the cloth map, the silver ones and the gold ones, and felt the silver running steady and clear beneath everything, entirely his, entirely free, and entirely unimpressed by the architecture built above it. In the hospital wing that night, eating chocolate frogs with Ron and Hermione on either side of his bed, he felt Strange's presence at the edge of the wards lift and move away, and he sent one word through the pendant, good. Strange sent back the same word, and in it was everything that didn't need to be said. Chapter 4, The Architecture of Lies. The Chamber of Secrets smelled like stone and standing water and something older than both, the particular cold of a place that had been sealed for 1,000 years and carried that sealing in its air like a held breath. Harry stood at the entrance to the pipe that dropped into the darkness below and thought, not for the first time that year, that Tom Riddle had been an extraordinarily talented architect of terrible things. He'd known about the chamber since October. Not from following the petrifications, not from the whispering voice in the walls, not from the trail of clues that Hermione had been brilliantly assembling since September. He'd felt the chamber's existence the moment he'd stepped onto the second-floor corridor on the third day of term, a deep resonance in the stonework, very old, very deliberate, the magical signature of something built with significant skill and sealed with the kind of intent that left marks even a millennium later. He'd identified the basilisk within the first week from the nature of the resonance. He'd found the diary in Moaning Myrtle's bathroom the second week of November when he'd gone looking specifically for Riddle's anchoring mechanism, because the petrifications had a quality that was too deliberate, too escalating, to be pure predation. Something was steering the basilisk. Something with a purpose. The diary had been exactly what he'd suspected the moment he'd picked it up and felt the wrongness of it, the specific, unmistakable density of a horcrux, a soul fragment bound into an object, hungry and aware in the way the fragment in his scar had been aware. Darker, though. Older. This one had been awake and waiting for 50 years. He hadn't opened it. He'd sealed it in a containment ward immediately, sent the details to Strange, and waited for instruction. Strange had sent back a 12-page analysis of Horcrux construction, which was 12 pages longer than Harry needed but which he'd read thoroughly anyway because Strange had noted which sections concerned extraction and neutralization specifically and those sections mattered. The problem was that the diary was also in Ginny Weasley's possession, had been since September, and the soul fragment inside it had been slowly, systematically consuming her for months. Harry had known that too. He'd seen it in Ginny's eyes by late October, a hollowness where her energy should have been, the specific quality of someone whose magical core was being accessed by something external, drawn down steadily like water draining from a reservoir. He'd told Ron immediately, who had gone pale and then very quietly furious in the way Ron went furious, the low burning kind that didn't make noise. They'd had a plan. A careful, surgical plan involving recovering the diary, extracting the fragment, and keeping Ginny away from it long enough for her own magic to reassert. It had been working. Then Lockhart had gotten involved. Gilderoy Lockhart was, Harry had determined by the end of September, a fraud of almost impressive magnitude. The magical signature of a man who had spent 20 years stealing other people's accomplishments and obliviating the witnesses was distinctive, a kind of applied absence, gaps in the resonance where experience should have been, the hollowness of someone performing competence without the underlying structure. Harry had found him mildly fascinating as a specimen of pure self-preservation, and professionally useless in every other respect. What Lockhart had done was find the diary in Ginny's dormitory while she was in the hospital wing, open it, which took a specific quality of foolishness Harry had underestimated even from him, and make full mental contact with the fragment inside, which had immediately exploited the connection, and the fragment had used Lockhart as a vehicle to get Ginny to the chamber before Harry's plan could intercept it. So the careful surgical plan had become a rescue, which was less elegant but more urgent. Ron was behind him at the pipe entrance, wand out, face set in the particular expression he wore when he was frightened and had decided the fear was irrelevant. "Down?" Ron said. "Down," Harry said. "Brilliant," Ron said, and jumped in. He'd contacted Strange before they'd come down, through the pendant, brief and factual. Riddle's diary fragment has Ginny in the chamber. Going in. The Horcrux destruction is the priority, extraction method from your notes. Strange's response had come back in under a minute. The basilisk venom is sufficient if you can deliver it without contact with the fangs. Structural dissolution of the Horcrux binding from inside, detail 3 in the 3rd section. Harry. Yes. The fragment will fight back. It's had 50 years to consolidate. This is not like dispersing a possessing wisp. This is a prepared intelligence with intent. A pause. Don't let it talk to you for too long. Understood. And the basilisk, close your eyes if you haven't already worked out the indirect sight problem. Harry had already worked out the indirect sight problem. He sent back mirrors. Strange had sent, obviously. Be careful. There had been a brief, additional pause, and then, Ron Weasley is going with you. Yes. Good. Something in the quality of that single word had been both approval and relief. Strange had met Ron twice, once in the room when Harry had brought him to see it, once through the communication mirror, and had assessed him with characteristic efficiency and determined that Ron Weasley was exactly what Harry had told him he was, which Strange had found more reassuring than he'd expressed directly and which Harry had understood anyway. The pipe dropped them into a tunnel that stretched for several hundred yards of cold and damp and the occasional collapsed ceiling section. Ron had his wand lit. Harry had the same ambient glow he used in the room, warmer, steadier, no wand required, which Ron had stopped reacting to in September and now simply treated as useful. "Okay," Ron said, while they walked. "The plan. The fragment, Riddle's constructed memory, will be in the main chamber with Ginny. The basilisk will be somewhere in the pipe network. I need to deal with the fragment before the basilisk, because the fragment is actively draining Ginny and every minute costs her." Harry kept his voice even. "I'll handle Riddle directly. Your job is Ginny, get her away from the center of the chamber the moment I engage Riddle, because whatever happens when I destroy the diary, the ambient discharge will be significant." "How significant?" "Significant enough that you want to be behind something solid." Ron absorbed this. "And the basilisk?" "Once Riddle is gone, the basilisk loses its direction. A basilisk without active command reverts to territorial instinct, it will retreat from anything it perceives as a larger threat. At full baseline I read as a larger threat to most predatory magical creatures." "That's either really reassuring or completely mad," Ron said. "Probably both," Harry agreed. The chamber opened around them, enormous, ancient, the carved serpent faces along the walls dripping with decades of damp, the long flooded floor reflecting the pale light. At the far end, Ginny lay on the wet stone, and standing over her was Tom Riddle. 16 years old, constructed from stolen life force, wearing Ginny's face like a mirror turned wrong. The diary lay on the floor beside him, open, leaking dark energy from every page. Riddle looked up when they came in, and he smiled. It was a remarkable smile. Constructed from charm and genuine intelligence and the specific magnetism of a person who had decided very early that people were instruments and had spent his whole life learning to play them well. Harry could feel the pull of it from 30 feet away, the compulsion woven into Riddle's manifested presence, the same fundamental architecture as Dumbledore's school enchantments but rawer, younger, designed for immediate use rather than long-term management. "Harry Potter," Riddle said. His voice was a good voice, clear, warm, measured. "I've heard a great deal about you." "I know considerably more about you," Harry said, walking forward, and his voice carried the specific quality of someone who is neither performing calm nor suppressing fear but simply has no particular fear to suppress. "Tom Marvolo Riddle. Half-blood. Orphan. Hogwarts, class of 1944. You were extraordinary and you knew it, and you let that knowledge become a door that everything wrong with you walked through." He stopped 10 feet away. "The name you chose for yourself. Voldemort. From the French. Flight from death." He tilted his head. "You were afraid." Something shifted in Riddle's assembled face. The smile stayed but something behind the eyes changed temperature. "You've done your research." "I've done considerably more than that." Harry glanced at Ginny. "Ron." Ron was already moving, had started moving the moment Harry started talking, using the conversation as cover, circling wide around the chamber's edge toward Ginny with the directional awareness of someone who had spent months learning to act while attention was elsewhere. Riddle tracked Ron with his eyes for 1 second, assessed him as secondary, returned to Harry. "You can't destroy me," Riddle said. "I'm not the kind of thing that can be destroyed by a 12-year-old. Second year," Harry corrected. "And I'm not going to destroy you. I'm going to destroy the diary, which amounts to the same thing as far as you're concerned." He held Riddle's gaze. "But first I want to ask you something." Riddle was curious, despite himself. Harry had counted on that, the specific weakness of extremely intelligent people, the way they'd walk toward interesting things even when interesting things were dangerous. "Ask." "The diary is 50 years old. You put this fragment of yourself into it as a 15-year-old, and you sealed it with the full architecture of a Horcrux. You were the youngest person in recorded magical history to successfully create one. That level of accomplishment at that age." Harry paused. "What did it feel like? When you realized what you'd made?" Riddle was still for a moment. Then, carefully, "Why do you ask?" "Because I want to understand you," Harry said, "and I want you to know that I understand you, before I destroy you. You deserve that, I think. Someone seeing the actual shape of what you were before you became what you decided to be." He watched Riddle's expression. "You were brilliant and you were alone and the world gave you nothing except its fear and its use of you, and you decided that if the world was going to be like that, you would master it. You would be the one doing the using. You would be the one they feared." He held the cold gaze. "And then Dumbledore found you, and shaped you, and redirected you, and used you better than anyone had thought to do it before." Riddle's expression cracked, just slightly. Just once. A microfracture in the constructed composure, there and gone. "You know nothing about," he identified you, Harry said quietly. "Watched you. Chose you. Guided your development in specific directions. Not because he wanted to help you, because he wanted a genuine dark wizard to rise, to give the wizarding world something clear to be afraid of, something that would require leadership and unity and a singular capable hero to defeat. He wanted the villain in the story as much as he wanted the hero." Harry watched it land. "You were his too, Tom. Just from the other side." The chamber was very quiet. Riddle stood absolutely still and something moved through his constructed face that Harry could only describe as the expression of someone hearing something true that they have been keeping themselves from knowing, and finding that the knowing was worse than the not knowing in ways they couldn't have predicted. Then he snarled, not the elegant villain's snarl of his usual performance, something genuinely raw, and Harry felt the attack coming before Riddle moved, felt it in the ambient magic, and was already reaching for the diary on the floor. He picked it up and felt the fragment's awareness surge toward him through the pages, intelligent, reaching, searching for the same vulnerability it had exploited in Ginny, the emptiness, the longing, the need. It found nothing like that in Harry. What it found instead was a magical baseline that it immediately recoiled from, the same recoil the scar fragment had given, and Harry felt it scramble to regroup. He held the diary in both hands and did what Strange's notes called structural dissolution from inside. It was not the basilisk venom method, which would have been efficient but also catastrophic for the diary's physical structure in a way that would scatter the Horcrux energy unpredictably. What Harry had developed, working from Strange's theoretical framework and his own 4 years of resonance technique, was more precise. He found the binding architecture of the Horcrux, the structure that held the soul fragment to the object, and he applied his own resonance to it not as an attack but as a fundamental incompatibility. His magical signature, at full native baseline, was simply too coherent, too self-possessed, too entirely itself for the Horcrux binding to maintain integrity in contact with it. The diary came apart from the inside. Not burned, not shattered, unmade, the binding dissolved, the anchoring structure collapsing inward, and the soul fragment inside it had about 2 seconds to understand what was happening before it dispersed in a rush of cold dark energy that swept through the chamber and dissipated against the ancient stone walls. Riddle screamed. The constructed body came apart like smoke in wind, the stolen life force releasing back into the air, and then the chamber was empty of him except for the echo of that scream against the serpent-carved walls. The diary in Harry's hands was just paper. He set it down. From across the chamber, Ron's voice, "Harry." And then, "She's breathing. She's okay. Bring her here," Harry said. He looked around the chamber. Felt for the basilisk. The enormous magical signature was moving, somewhere in the deep pipe network above them, no longer directed, no longer steering toward them, shifting into the confused territorial pattern of a predator whose driver had disappeared. "We need to move. The basilisk will reorient to its last anchored territory in about 10 minutes. Ginny was groggy and pale and looked at him with eyes that were trying to focus and couldn't quite. Ron had her arm over his shoulder, half carrying, and she managed, "Harry, I didn't mean, the diary, it just, I know," Harry said. "It wasn't you. You didn't have a choice." He looked at her directly and made sure she heard it. "It was done to you. There's a difference." She looked at him for a moment and some of the white went out of her face. They were halfway back through the tunnel when Lockhart reappeared from behind a rock fall, looking significantly less polished than his usual self. He'd apparently been hiding since before they arrived, which Harry had suspected from the moment they'd entered and not found him in the chamber as expected. He stumbled toward them and Harry saw, immediately, that the diary's collapse had destabilized whatever control the fragment had been exerting over him and he was now simply a frightened man in a very dark tunnel. "Right," Lockhart said, in the voice of someone improvising desperately, "right, yes, the beast is slain, the girl is safe, if anyone asks it was my professor," Harry said pleasantly, "please don't." Lockhart looked at him. Something about Harry's tone, which was entirely conversational and somehow more effective for it, stopped the improvisation cold. "The Obliviate attempts on the first 2 witnesses aren't going to hold," Harry continued. "I know about them. And the DMLE will have them when this is over." He tilted his head. "If you walk out of this tunnel honestly, you have a better chance than if you don't." Lockhart stared at him. He was not, at his core, a brave man. He was a man who had spent his career calculating odds and running in the better direction. He looked at Harry and did a rapid calculation and something in it apparently told him this 12-year-old was offering him the better direction. "Right," Lockhart said again, in a completely different register. "Right. Yes." He fell in behind them and was quiet for the rest of the journey out. The hospital wing had 7 occupants by that evening, the petrified students who'd been restored with Professor Sprout's mandrake potion, Ginny, and Lockhart, who was in a curtained bay at the far end and had been speaking to 2 ministry officials for approximately 2 hours. Madame Pomfrey moved between beds with the efficiency of a woman who considered adversity a scheduling challenge. Harry sat with Ron and Hermione by Ginny's bed and told them everything, from the first week of term to the diary's destruction, while Ginny listened with the slightly overwhelmed expression of someone putting together a puzzle and realizing it's bigger than the box. "You knew in October," Hermione said. "September, really? October I had the full picture. And you didn't," she stopped herself. She'd learned, over the year, to complete the thought before voicing it. "You didn't move sooner because moving sooner would have fixed the symptom without addressing the cause. You needed the diary to remain traceable to whoever planted it." "Lucius Malfoy," Harry said. "He put it in Ginny's cauldron at Diagon Alley in September. I felt his magical residue on the binding when I first picked it up." He paused. Lucius Malfoy acting as delivery mechanism means the diary came from Malfoy Manor's collection. Which means Dumbledore is not the direct source. This one's Malfoy's initiative, using a riddle artifact to destabilize Dumbledore's Harry Potter project by discrediting Muggle-born students through a monster attack, while simultaneously testing whether an unleashed basilisk would escalate the perceived threat level enough to give Dumbledore grounds to do something drastic. "Like close the school," Ron said, and he said it flatly, because he'd read the same history Harry had and they both knew what closing the school meant for families who couldn't afford private education. "Right," Harry said. Hermione looked at him with the expression she wore when a conclusion was making her angry in a structural way, the kind that didn't burn hot but built pressure. "So Dumbledore didn't arrange this one?" "No. This one was Malfoy's initiative, using a riddle artifact he should have turned over to the Ministry a decade ago." Harry paused. "But here's what I want you to think about. When Dumbledore finds out that the chamber is open, that a student was taken inside, and that the threat was resolved by students without him, he watched their faces. What's his primary concern?" Hermione answered immediately, "The deviation from expected outcome." "Yes. Specifically, how? How did Harry Potter, 12 years old, defeat a 50-year-old Horcrux construct and drive off a 1,000-year-old basilisk when the scenario was calibrated for something either catastrophic or heroically difficult?" Harry looked at Ginny. "How are you feeling?" Ginny, who had been listening with increasing alertness as her own energy returned, gave him a look that was partly still processing and partly something more direct. "Like someone emptied me out and then you filled the room back up," she said. She paused. "That sounds odd. I mean, when you destroyed the diary, there was this release. Like pressure coming off." She looked at Ron. "Why didn't you lot tell me about any of this?" "We were trying to be subtle," Ron said. "You're terrible at subtle." "Harry's not." Ginny looked at Harry. "No," she said, with the particular tone of someone adjusting their assessment of a person upward. "He's really not." The curtain around their section of the ward moved and Dumbledore was there, because Dumbledore had a quality of appearance that was less like entering a room and more like being revealed in it. He looked at them all with the warm, particular attention Harry had catalogued a dozen times by now, and then his gaze settled on Harry and the assessment in it was faster and more precise than it ever showed on the surface. "Harry," he said. "I've heard from Professor McGonagall what happened tonight. I'd like to hear it from you, if you feel up to it." Harry moved to stand, Hermione made a small sound of protest, Ginny looked curious, and said, "Of course." To the others, "I'll be back." He followed Dumbledore to the small private alcove at the end of the ward, and they sat across from each other, and Dumbledore folded his hands and waited with the patience of a very old man who has made time bend to him before. Harry told him the story. He told it well, truthfully, in all its basic facts, with the kind of 12-year-old in hindsight narrative that made it feel lucky and instinctive and terrifying, which some of it genuinely had been, and he drew on those genuine parts freely. The voice in the walls, the following of clues, Hermione's brilliant deduction about the basilisk, finding Ginny in the chamber, facing Riddle, the diary's destruction. He left out, for years of training, the pendant, Strange, the fact that he'd known about the chamber since September, the Horcrux analysis, the precise technical method of the diary's destruction, and everything he knew about Dumbledore's own architecture. When he finished, Dumbledore was quiet for a moment in the way that was not thinking but calculating, the brief internal adjustment of a very intelligent man updating his model. "The diary," Dumbledore said. "Do you know what it was?" "A memory," Harry said. "A version of Tom Riddle from 50 years ago." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "He told me things. About Hogwarts when he was a student. About how he opened the chamber the first time." "What else did he tell you?" "Quiet. Careful." Harry held the old man's gaze. "He seemed to think he had a great deal in common with me," he said. "Orphan. Famous in his own way. A difficult childhood." He paused. "I told him we were nothing alike." Something moved through Dumbledore's eyes. Relief, yes, but also, recalibration. The question of how a 12-year-old had the stability to resist the fragment's manipulation sat in the room between them, unanswered, and Dumbledore was too careful to ask it directly. "You were very brave," Dumbledore said. "And very capable. Exceptionally so." The warmth was entirely real. So was the angle behind it. "I find myself wondering, Harry, what prepared you so well for something so extraordinary?" "Books, mostly," Harry said. "And having good friends." He let a beat pass. "And growing up in a house where things were difficult. You learn to stay calm when there's no one to be calm for you." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, and the expression on his face was complicated. It was genuine regret, Harry thought. Not performed, not deployed strategically. Actual regret, the kind that Dumbledore had learned to sit with because the alternative was admitting that the architecture he'd built required the difficult childhood to function correctly, and that admission was a door he could not afford to open. "I am sorry," Dumbledore said softly, "that your early years were not easier." "I know you are," Harry said. And he meant it. And Dumbledore heard it and looked at him with something that was nearly surprise, because it was not forgiveness and not accusation but simply accurate perception, and accurate perception was the thing Albus Dumbledore encountered least often in the people around him. Harry went back to Ron and Hermione and Ginny, and the curtain fell back into place, and outside the ward the castle hummed its dual humming, and below it, very deep, in the stones and the water and the ancient sealed places, the silver fate lines ran clear. 2 weeks after the chamber, when the school had settled back into the ordinary rhythms of exam season and Lockhart had quietly resigned and disappeared into a private ministry hearing, Harry went up to the room of requirement at midnight and opened the portal to the sanctum. Not a message. An actual visit. Strange appeared on the other side of the portal in what looked like the sanctum's main library, with tea and an expression that said he'd been expecting this. Harry stepped through, and the portal closed behind him, and he sat down in the chair across from Strange and was quiet for a moment. "The diary had older Dumbledore material in it," Harry said. "I told you that in the message. You gave me the dates. I've been researching." Strange slid a folder across the table between them. Harry opened it. Inside were 20 years of cross-referenced observations, precise and damning, Dumbledore's surveillance of Tom Riddle from ages 11 through 17, the specific guided manipulations, the strategic encouragements toward dark magic that looked, taken individually, like ordinary poor judgment or even genuine mistakes, but taken together formed a pattern of deliberate cultivation. "He didn't create Voldemort," Strange said. "But he fertilized the soil." Harry turned the pages slowly. "He needed a villain. He needed a context," Strange said. "A dark wizard of sufficient power to unify the wizarding world around a single existential threat, which would require a single extraordinary leader to address. He'd been working toward it since Grindelwald. He defeated Grindelwald himself in 1945, you'll note, which is when the British wizarding world first developed the specific Dumbledore as singular protector mythology that his entire institutional power base rests on. He's been doing this for 80 years, Harry said. He's been doing this since he was in his 20s and believed absolutely in his own exceptional capacity for rightness, Strange said. The tragedy of it, and I use the word precisely, is that in many respects he is exceptional. His magical ability, his strategic intelligence, his genuine care for large-scale human welfare. In a different person with different checks, those qualities would produce a genuinely great leader. He paused. In Dumbledore, they produced a man who has spent 80 years arranging the world to confirm his own necessity. Harry closed the folder. He was quiet for a moment. That Strange let be quiet. He said he was sorry, Harry said. About my childhood. He meant it. I know. It doesn't help, exactly. Harry looked at the folder. But it's something. That he knows it was wrong, and it costs him something to know that. Yes, Strange said. He is not a monster. Monsters are simpler. What he did to my parents' generation, Harry said, and his voice was still level, but Strange heard what was underneath it. The things in that folder. He was manipulating them too. Yes. My mother. My father. He positioned them. Moved them. Harry looked up. Were they happy? Before he needed them for the sacrifice? Strange was quiet for a moment. From everything I've been able to find, yes. They chose each other. That was real. Their friendship group, the work they believed in. Real. He held Harry's gaze. He didn't manufacture them. He used what was already genuine. That's a meaningful distinction. It doesn't feel like one right now. No, Strange agreed. It won't for a while. He let that sit without trying to improve it. The Horcruxes, he said, after a moment, moving because Harry needed forward motion more than he needed space. The diary is one. There are others. 6 total, I think. Based on the magical signature of Voldemort's dispersed fragments and the structural mathematics of his soul division. Harry straightened. I've been working on the identification methodology. Show me. Harry pulled out a notebook, his own, dense with calculations and annotated magical theory, and spread it on the table, and Strange leaned forward with the focused precision of a man who was, despite himself, genuinely impressed, and they worked for 2 hours in the Sanctum Library while London slept below and the year turned quietly toward summer. Before Harry went back, standing at the portal's edge, Strange said, "You did exceptional work in the chamber." Harry glanced back at him. "You read the technical report I sent." "I read it 4 times, Strange said. The dissolution method, the inside-out binding collapse using native resonance incompatibility. That was not in my notes. That was yours." Harry was quiet for a moment. "I improvised it from the framework." "I know. That's what I mean." Strange held his gaze. "There are techniques in the Sanctum's catalog that took adult sorcerers years to develop from established theoretical groundwork. What you did in that chamber with a 50-year consolidated Horcrux binding was, technically, unprecedented." Harry didn't say anything for a moment. "Then, does it help? Knowing that?" Strange considered him, the 12-year-old with the ancient eyes and the fate lines running finally, mostly free, and the growing weight of understanding who had been done to him and why. "Does it help you?" "A bit," Harry admitted. "Knowing that the things I do are mine. That even when I'm operating inside someone else's story, what I build from it belongs to me." Strange nodded. "Then yes. It helps." Harry stepped through the portal. The end-of-term feast was loud and golden and smelled of good food and collective relief, and Harry sat between Ron and Hermione and ate steadily and thought about the coming summer and the year after that and the slow accumulating dismantlement of a decades-old architecture built by an extraordinary man who believed, with complete sincerity, that his vision of the world was the only one worth protecting. At the high table, Dumbledore ate his dinner and spoke with McGonagall and smiled at students who caught his eye, and once, across the length of the hall, his gaze found Harry's. Harry held it. Didn't look away. Dumbledore smiled, warm, genuine, the full warmth, and raised his goblet very slightly in a small, private acknowledgement. Harry raised his juice. The hall roared with end-of-year noise around them, and the two of them held that brief, complicated space across the noise, and what passed between them was not threat and not affection but something precise: recognition. The beginning of two people acknowledging, without words, that they understood each other's positions more clearly than either had yet spoken aloud. Dumbledore's smile didn't change. But his eyes did, just slightly, just once, and Harry saw in them the thing Strange had told him to look for, the first genuine, structural uncertainty of a man who had been certain for 80 years and was beginning to find the certainty had a hairline crack in it. Harry looked back at his plate and ate his dinner and was 12 years old for a little while longer. Chapter 5. The Man in the Mirror. The Dementors arrived at Hogsmeade Station on a grey September morning and made the air feel like the inside of a grave, and every student on the Hogwarts Express went pale and small, and some of them started crying without entirely understanding why, and Harry sat in his compartment and felt them and felt something else underneath them: the careful, deliberate decision Dumbledore had made to station these creatures around a school full of children. He'd known they were coming. Strange had told him in August, during one of their summer sessions in the room, that Dumbledore had petitioned the Ministry to station Dementors around Hogwarts on the grounds of protecting the school from Sirius Black's alleged threat. Strange had delivered this information with his characteristic flatness, which meant he found it both predictable and contemptible. "The Dementors will affect you," Strange had said. "More than most. Dementors work by surfacing the worst emotional memories of whoever they're near. You have more material to work with than most 13-year-olds. The cupboard years, the isolation. They'll find it." "I know," Harry had said. "I've been working on the Patronus." Strange had looked at him. "You've been working on the Patronus. Third-year Dada's syllabi are available at Flourish and Blots." I looked ahead. He'd paused. "I've been practicing the emotional architecture of it. The Patronus requires a specific quality of memory that isn't just happy," Strange had said, leaning forward. "It requires memory that has enough genuine power and presence to displace the Dementor's surfacing effect. Most adults struggle with it because happiness as a general mood isn't specific enough," Harry had said. "It needs to be a particular moment. Something that has enough density of reality to push back against something that's trying to make reality feel absent." He'd paused. "I've been thinking about which memories have that." Strange had been quiet for a moment. "Which ones did you choose?" Harry had looked at him directly. "The first time you came back," he'd said. 3 weeks after the first visit. You didn't have to. I wasn't expecting you. But you came back anyway." Strange had not said anything. But something moved through his face that he hadn't quite managed to control, and Harry had filed it the way he filed everything important, completely, permanently, understanding its exact nature without needing to name it aloud. So when the Dementor glided down the train corridor and the compartment went cold and dark and Harry heard the beginning of a woman's voice, high and terrible, and he was ready. He reached for the memory, the specific weight of a Thursday evening and a portal tearing open in a dusty cupboard and a man returning because he'd decided to, and the silver light that came out of his wand was not a wisp but a full Patronus, corporeal, blazing. It was a stag. It filled the corridor. The Dementor fled. Harry sat down and breathed and registered that Hermione was staring at him and Ron was holding the window frame, and Neville Longbottom, who had been placed in their compartment apparently at random, though Harry wondered about that, had pressed himself into the corner and looked like he'd seen something he wasn't sure was real. "Did you just?" Ron said. "Yes," Harry said. "That was a fully formed Patronus," Hermione said. "Harry, that is a NEWT level." "I know," Harry said. "Chocolate, anyone?" He produced a bar of Honeyduke's finest from his bag, because Strange had mentioned after Harry's description of the Dementor effect that sugar helped with the aftermath, and Harry had learned over years of training to have what you needed before you needed it. Neville took a piece with trembling hands and looked at Harry with those round, slightly overwhelmed eyes. "How did you do that?" he said. "I've read about the Patronus charm. I've read about it a lot. Everyone says it's hard," Harry said. It is hard. I had time to practice. He handed chocolate to Hermione and Ron and looked at Neville properly. He'd known Neville by sight since first year, shy, uncertain, technically competent in herbology in a way he clearly didn't receive enough acknowledgement for, haunted by something he never talked about. "You're good with plants," Harry said. Neville blinked. Yes. Why? Just noting it, Harry said. You should note it too. You're better at it than anyone in our year, including the 6th year sprout uses as helpers. He paused. That's worth more than people give it credit for. Neville looked at him with the expression of someone receiving something they hadn't expected and didn't know how to put down. Thanks, he said, quietly. The train ran on toward Hogwarts and the Dementors were behind them, and Harry looked out the window at the graying landscape and thought about Sirius Black. He'd been researching Sirius Black since the announcement in August that an allegedly dangerous mass murderer had escaped Azkaban. Strange had provided the Sanctum's files on the original trial, or rather, the catastrophic absence of a trial, because Sirius Black had been sent to Azkaban without ever being brought before the Wisengamot, without evidence presented, without defense, without a single procedural safeguard that the wizarding justice system was supposed to provide. Bartemius Crouch Sr. had signed the commitment order himself, in the immediate aftermath of the war, when the climate was such that it was easy and convenient to look decisive and deal with things quickly. The case against Sirius Black was, Dumbledore had believed him guilty, and Peter Pettigrew was dead, and the 13 Muggles were dead, and someone had to have done it and Sirius Black was there. Harry had read the file 3 times. He had also read the file on Peter Pettigrew, which was very thin, which was the most interesting thing about it. And he had read the file on the Fidelius charm and its mechanics and who could and couldn't betray what, and by the end of August he had a fairly complete picture of what had actually happened on the night his parents died. He had not yet told Ron about the rat. He was going to. But he wanted the right moment, the right information in place, the right understanding of what telling Ron would cost him and whether Ron was going to be okay. He knew Ron was going to be okay. Ron was fundamentally okay in the deep structural sense that mattered, but he wanted to be careful with it, because it was Ron's pet and Ron's family home and a person Ron had lived alongside since he was born. He would tell him soon. The rat was running out of time to be a secret. Professor Lupin turned out to be the most genuinely good teacher Harry had encountered at Hogwarts, which was not a high bar given that the position had been held in the previous 2 years by a fraud and a suspected dark wizard, but Lupin would have cleared a high bar regardless. He taught as though the material mattered, set tests that required actual understanding, and treated students as people with varying strengths rather than a single standard to be measured against. He also looked at Harry on the first day with an expression that was trying very hard to be professional and was not entirely succeeding, the expression of someone looking at the son of people they had loved and finding the resemblance more than they'd prepared for. Harry recognized it and accepted it and didn't make it strange. What Harry made very deliberate use of was Lupin's willingness to teach beyond the syllabus. He'd stayed after the 3rd class of term, the Boggart lesson, which Harry had allowed to play out naturally because Neville deserved the win of defeating Snape in address and Harry had no interest in stealing it, and asked about Dementor specifically, about the magical theory underlying them, the exact nature of their effect on memory and emotional resonance. Lupin had looked at him carefully. "This is for the Patronus," he'd said. "I can cast a Patronus," Harry had said. "I want to understand the mechanism. Why does a specific sufficiently real memory work when general positive emotion doesn't? What's the exact quality of the incompatibility between Dementor magic and Patronus light?" Lupin had been quiet for a moment. Then, "You're not asking me because you don't know. You're asking because you want to compare what I know with what you already have." "Yes," Harry had said, without embarrassment. "You were in the Order of the Phoenix. You have practical experience with Dementor exposure that most published texts don't cover." Lupin's expression had shifted through several things in rapid succession. He'd pulled out a chair and sat down and looked at Harry with the new, recalibrated attention of someone who has updated their model. "Sit down," he'd said. This will take a while. They'd talked for 90 minutes. Lupin was exactly as knowledgeable as Harry had hoped, and his knowledge filled several specific gaps in Strange's theoretical framework on despair-based magic that Harry had been working around. He came away from the conversation with a cleaner understanding of Dementor mechanics and a growing appreciation for Remus Lupin as a person who had survived an extraordinarily difficult life by making himself useful and allowing himself, occasionally, to be kind. He told Strange about the conversation that weekend, through the communication mirror. Strange's response was, "Lupin is a good source. Be careful what you give him in return." "I know," Harry had said. "He loved my father. He looks at me and it hurts him." "I don't want to, you can be honest with him," Strange said. Carefully. "He's not Dumbledore's instrument, I've checked. His loyalties are to people, not to institutional architecture." A pause. "He's also a werewolf, which means he has spent his life on the outside of systems that claim to protect people and actually protect specific people specifically. He'll understand the kind of thing you're navigating better than most." Harry had thought about that. Should I tell him more? Not yet. Build the trust first. Let it be what it is naturally. Strange had paused. "He's going to be important to you, Harry. Not strategically. Actually." Harry had understood what Strange meant. He'd thought about it for the rest of the weekend. October brought the Quidditch season and a storm that took out his Nimbus 2000 and the discovery of the Marauders map, which Harry found in Filch's filing cabinet during a midnight excursion to the third floor that he'd taken purely out of academic interest in a filing system he'd noticed Filch updating with unusual frequency. The map was extraordinary. Not just as a practical tool, though it was that, exceptional, showing every person in the castle in real time, but as a piece of magical craftsmanship. Whoever had made it had a genuine understanding of magical resonance and spatial mapping that was, by Harry's assessment, decades ahead of the standard wizarding curriculum. He read the enchantments on it for 20 minutes before he activated it, cataloging the architecture with the focused attention Strange had built into him. Then he activated it and looked at the names, and found one in the Gryffindor boys' dormitory. Peter Pettigrew. Overlapping with the dot labeled Ronald Weasley. Harry sat very still for about 4 seconds. Then he went back to the dormitory, cast a precise locking charm on the door that none of the castle's standard unlocking spells would touch, and looked at Ron sleeping and at Scabbers in his cage and thought about how to do this correctly. He waited until morning. He let Ron wake up naturally, let him eat breakfast, waited until they were in the room of requirement with Hermione present, because Hermione was going to catch the implications faster than Ron and Ron was going to need someone to look at who wasn't Harry. He told them everything about Sirius Black. The full file. The missing trial. The Fidelius mechanics. The specific impossibility of what Sirius had allegedly done. Then he told them about the map, and Pettigrew, and what that meant. Ron sat very still for a long time after Harry finished. Hermione had one hand on Ron's arm. She was watching Ron with the quiet attention of someone prioritizing a person over a conclusion. "He's been living in my house," Ron said, finally. "Since I was born." "Yes." "He's been, for 12 years, yes." Ron looked at the cage in the corner of the room where Harry had brought Scabbers. The rat was cowering in the far corner, which was somewhat telling given that it had presumably never been in the room before and had no reason to recognize it as a location associated with exposure. "Scabbers bit Goyle in second year," Ron said, almost conversationally. "Deeply. Goyle bled for 10 minutes. He paused. "He never bit anyone in my family. Not once in 12 years. He needed to stay safe," Hermione said quietly. "With your family specifically, with children. Children don't ask hard questions." Ron looked at her and then at Harry and something moved through his face that was not one thing but several things in sequence, all of them real and none of them requiring intervention. He landed on a quiet, hard determination. "What do we do?" We need to present the evidence to the right authority, Harry said. Not Dumbledore. Not directly. He'd been thinking about this for weeks. Amelia Bones at the DMLE. She's the one person in the Ministry I'm confident would run a legitimate investigation rather than deferring to Dumbledore's original judgment. How do you know about Amelia Bones? Ron said. I read, Harry said. She's been running independent reviews of war-era convictions since 1990. She's the only person who's actually tried to address Crouch's post-war summary commitments. He paused. She'll listen if the evidence is clear. And Sirius? Hermione said. He's currently in the castle. I've seen him on the map, he's been in the tunnels. I know, Harry said. I'm going to talk to him. Both of them looked at him. He's not dangerous, Harry said. Not to us. The Dementors haven't broken him the way they break most people. There's a reason for that which I'll explain when I have time. But the more relevant point is that he escaped Azkaban to get to Pettigrew, not to us. He's been watching the map. He paused. He made his own copy of it. He was one of the people who made it. How do you? Hermione stopped. The Marauders. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, Prongs. She worked it out in about 2 seconds. Sirius Black is Padfoot. Sirius Black is Padfoot, Harry confirmed. And Pettigrew is Wormtail. And my father was Prongs. He looked at the rat cage. And Wormtail has been in Ron's family's house for 12 years because he needed to stay close to a wizarding family where he'd hear news, where he'd know what was happening in the world, where he'd be positioned to run the moment Voldemort came back close enough to give him a route back. Ron closed his eyes briefly. My family housed the man who betrayed your parents. Your family housed a rat they were told was a rat, Harry said, with precision. That's a different sentence. Ron. He waited until Ron opened his eyes and looked at him. This is not yours. Nothing about this is yours. Ron held his gaze for a moment and then nodded, once, the way he nodded when he'd taken something in and was storing it properly. He met Sirius Black in the tunnel beneath the Whomping Willow on a Wednesday night in November, alone, which Strange had objected to with the measured intensity of someone who had learned to pick their objections carefully. Alone is an unnecessary risk. Alone is the necessary condition, Harry had sent back. He won't talk freely if there are other people. He doesn't trust easily and he's been alone for 12 years, any more than one person and he closes down. I need him to talk. You've psychologically profiled an escapee from Azkaban. Strange. I've been doing this since I was 7. A pause that felt like exasperation. Be at the tunnel entrance at 9. I'll be at the ward boundary in case it goes wrong. It won't go wrong. I know it won't. I'll be there anyway. The tunnel was long and low and smelled of earth and old wood, and Sirius was at the far end of it, in the Shrieking Shack's ground floor room, thin and pale and looking at Harry with eyes that were very bright and very wary and conducting a rapid assessment that Harry recognized as belonging to someone who had been trained in the same school of careful observation as himself. Different training. Same instinct. Sirius looked at him for a long moment without speaking. In the pale light of Harry's ambient glow, wandless, as usual, his face showed its resemblances and its damage in equal measure. You're James's son, Sirius said. His voice was rough from disuse but not weak. And Lily's, Harry said. Something moved through Sirius's face at that. Yes, he said. And Lily's. He paused. You don't look frightened. I know who you are, Harry said. The real version, not the Ministry version. He came fully into the room and sat down on the dusty floor without being invited, because being invited required waiting and waiting was performing a dynamic he didn't want. I know about Peter. I know about the Fidelius. I know what actually happened. He looked at Sirius directly. I've known since August. Sirius stared at him. You've known since I had access to the case file. The absence of a trial was notable. Harry held his gaze. You've been trying to get to Peter for months. He's here. Sirius's voice dropped to something stripped down and raw. He's been here the whole year. I could see him on the... He stopped. Looked at Harry's bag. You have it. Harry produced the map. Sirius reached for it with the involuntary movement of something fundamental, not want but recognition, the way you reach for something that belongs to a version of you that used to exist. He held it and looked at it, and his hands were not quite steady. Mooney made the spatial enchantments, Sirius said. James did the intent reading. Peter did the passage mapping. I did the identity signatures. He ran a thumb across the parchment. We were 16. It's extraordinary work, Harry said. I spent 20 minutes analyzing the enchantment structure before I activated it. Sirius looked up at him. The wariness was still there, but something behind it was adjusting, recalibrating, the same quality Strange had when he updated his assessment. You're not what I expected. People keep saying that, Harry said. What did you expect? James's son, Sirius said simply. Then, more honestly, I expected someone who needed protecting. Harry looked at him steadily. I'm going to get you out, he said. Not through Dumbledore's channels. Through Amelia Bones at the DMLE. Bones has been reviewing War Era convictions. She'll take the case if we can get her the evidence directly. Peter's presence in the castle, confirmed by 2 witnesses and the map's identity signatures, combined with the Fidelius mechanics and the physical impossibility of what you allegedly did. He paused. I need you to do a few things. First, stay in the tunnels for 3 weeks. Don't approach Pettigrew directly. Don't let him run before we're ready. He'll run, Sirius said. He's a coward. The moment he thinks someone's close, he won't know we're close, Harry said. Hermione has been running a containment charm on the rat cage since Tuesday. It reads to Pettigrew as ordinary cage material. He can't transform while it's active. Sirius stared at him. Hermione Granger put a containment charm on. She's very good, Harry said. Second thing, I need your memory of the Fidelius casting. The actual memory, retrievable, suitable for pensive evidence. Dumbledore has a pensive in his office. We won't use his. Bones has access to a ministry one that's evidentiary grade. How do you know Dumbledore has a pensive? I know the contents of most of the rooms in this castle, Harry said. Not boasting. Just accurate. Sirius looked at him for a long time. The bright, wary eyes went through several calculations and then settled into something different, not relaxed, exactly, but trusting. The specific trust of a person who has been alone too long and has found someone who knows the real shape of things. Your father, Sirius said, was the most naturally gifted wizard I ever met. Brilliant, funny, occasionally an absolute nightmare, but genuinely great. He paused. You're not him. I know, Harry said. You're something different, Sirius said. Better, I think. Which would have made him proud and also deeply annoyed. The ghost of something crossed his face that was almost a smile. He was competitive. Harry felt something in his chest, warm and specific and new. Not the theoretical shape of a parent he'd lost before he could form memories, but a real dimension added to a real person. Tell me about him, he said. Later. When this is done and you're free. I want to hear everything. Sirius looked at him and the almost smile became real, brief and fierce and entirely unguarded. Everything's a lot. I have time, Harry said. I've been reading my whole life because no one was talking to me. I can listen for a long time. Sirius laughed, rough and unpracticed from disuse but real, genuinely real, and in the dusty shrieking shack it sounded like something coming back that had been away too long. Strange and Harry had the argument in December, in the room, and it was the first real argument they'd ever had, not a disagreement about technique or timing, but a structural one, about something that mattered in a way that neither of them had previously articulated directly. It started because Strange had been reviewing Harry's research on the remaining Horcruxes and had raised the question of timeline, how long Harry intended to wait before moving against Dumbledore's architecture directly, and Harry had said he was thinking about 4th year, and Strange had said that was too early, and Harry had said with respect, "It isn't your call," and Strange had said with equal respect, "I've been advising you on this for 6 years, and Harry had said yes, and I'm grateful. And it's still not your call." The room was very quiet after that. "I'm not trying to control the outcome," Strange said. "I know," Harry said. "But you're treating the timeline as a variable to be optimized and it isn't. It's my life." He looked at Strange without heat, because this wasn't anger, it was something more fundamental. "I know you're doing it because you want to be sure the conditions are right. You want everything in place before I move. He paused. "That comes from a real place." "I know it does. But Dumbledore has been arranging my conditions since before I could walk, and the thing I'm trying to do, the thing that matters, is make choices from my own judgment, not from someone else's assessment of when I'm ready." Strange sat with this for a moment. Outside the room's absence of windows, the castle was doing what castles do in December, settling deeper into its stones, the way old buildings do in cold. "You're right," Strange said, eventually. Harry looked at him. "You're right," Strange said again, more completely. "That's the point of everything we've done. The whole purpose. You making your own choices from your own judgment." He held Harry's gaze. He stopped. "Scared," Harry said, very quietly. A very long pause. "Careful," Strange said finally. "I'm careful. There's a difference." "Not always," Harry said. "Sometimes careful and scared are the same thing wearing different clothes." He paused. "I'm not going to do anything reckless. I'm not going to move before I'm ready. But I'm the one who knows when I'm ready, and you have to trust that, or the whole thing becomes the same thing I'm trying to get out of, someone else deciding what I can handle and when." Strange looked at him for a moment that was long and real. "I know," Strange said. "I know you know," Harry said. "I just need you to actually do it." Another silence. Then Strange said, in a different register, quieter, more stripped down, the voice he used when he was speaking precisely because imprecision would be dishonest, "When I was your age, I was different. My version of control was considerably less self-aware than yours. I've spent years learning that other people's autonomy is not mine to manage, and I do believe it, and occasionally I still have to relearn it." He paused. "I'm relearning it now." Harry looked at him and understood something he had never needed to put into words before, that Strange's investment in his safety was not separate from Strange's fear of losing him, and that it had nothing to do with the fate lines or the Sorcerer Supreme's mandate or the timeline anomaly from 6 years ago. That was real and had been real for a long time, and Strange was offering him the truth of it because Strange, when it really mattered, always chose the honest thing. "I know," Harry said, with all of what that meant. Strange nodded once. "And then they went back to work, because that was also what you did, you understood each other truly and then you kept moving." Sirius's freedom came through in February, which was 3 months faster than Harry had projected and attributable almost entirely to Amelia Bones being exactly the kind of person Harry had read her to be, rigorous, impartial, and deeply uninterested in the institutional convenience of maintaining a conclusion that hadn't been reached through correct procedure. The hearing lasted 4 hours. Harry gave evidence. Hermione gave evidence. The map's identity signatures were certified by a neutral enchantment examiner. Peter Pettigrew, transformed back by a ministry-certified wizard under controlled conditions, was found in possession of information that made his 12 years of hiding comprehensively explicable. Sirius walked out of the ministry building on a Tuesday morning looking like a man who has been underwater for a long time and has finally broken the surface. Harry was waiting outside with Hermione and Ron, and they stood on the pavement in February cold, and Sirius looked at them and then at Harry specifically with those bright eyes that were slightly less damaged than they'd been in November. "Hello," Harry said. "Hello," Sirius said. His voice was steadier than the shrieking shack. He'd had 3 months of regular food and minimal Dementor exposure, and it showed. "You said you'd get me out." "I said I'd get you out," Harry confirmed. 13-year-old, Sirius said, "got me out of 12 years of wrongful imprisonment in approximately 3 months. Technically Hermione did most of the legal paperwork." "I absolutely did," Hermione said, not without satisfaction. "And Ron helped with he really didn't," Ron said cheerfully. "I was mostly morally supportive. My rat was the criminal. I think that balances out." Sirius looked at them, one by one, and the expression on his face was the kind that happens when something you stopped allowing yourself to want turns out to actually be real. He looked back at Harry last. "You said you wanted to hear everything about your father." "I said I had time. I have considerably more time than I did 3 months ago." Sirius's voice was dry and warm simultaneously, the humor of someone who has survived something long enough to find it absurd. "I've got a house. Technically. Terrible house, family home, full of dark objects and a portrait of my mother that screams at everyone. But it's got rooms." "That sounds like an improvement," Harry said. Sirius looked at him steadily for a moment. "I want to be your guardian," he said. "Formally. I was supposed to be when you were born. I want to actually be it." Harry looked at him. He thought about the cupboard, and the years in it, and Strange arriving through the tear in the air, and the question Strange had asked on that first night, "Is there anything you need?" and what it had meant to have someone to send one word to at 2 in the morning and receive one word back. He thought about what it would mean to have that in the physical world too, in a house with rooms, someone present in the particular way that Strange, by necessity of dimension and responsibility, could only be partially present. "Yes," Harry said. Sirius nodded, and something settled in him that had been unsettled for 12 years. They walked down the ministry steps into the February morning, and Ron was talking about his mum already insisting Sirius come to dinner, and Hermione was making notes about the formal guardianship process, and Sirius walked with the careful, slightly unsteady gait of a man learning to be in the world again, and Harry walked next to him and thought that this specifically, was what the silver fate lines had probably been tending toward all along. Not a prophecy. Not a chosen destiny. Just this, belonging, chosen freely, by people who'd looked at the real shape of things and decided yes anyway. That evening, in the room, he told Strange about Sirius's guardianship. Strange was quiet for a moment. Then, "Good. You're not going to argue that it complicates things." "It doesn't complicate things," Strange said. "It gives you something to come home to. That's not a complication." He paused. "That's the point." Harry looked at him. "Strange." "Yes. Thank you," Harry said. "For everything. From the beginning." Strange met his eyes. The precise, careful face did the thing it occasionally did, came briefly undone, the control and the methodology set aside, and what was underneath was exactly what it was and had always been, from the night he'd come back 3 weeks after the first visit because he'd decided to. "Don't thank me yet," Strange said. "We haven't finished." "I know," Harry said. "But I wanted to say it now anyway. In case I forget later when things get complicated." "They will get complicated," Strange said. "Voldemort's coming back," Harry agreed. "I know. And Dumbledore." He looked at his hands, the hands that had dissolved the Horcrux from the inside, carried a contained soul fragment in a brass vessel, cast a Patronus at 11, rebuilt their own fate architecture piece by piece from the age of 7. "I'm ready." Strange looked at him for a long moment. Outside the room, the castle hummed its familiar dual hum. Somewhere below them, Sirius Black was signing guardianship paperwork in McGonagall's office, because McGonagall was a rule follower in all the right places. Somewhere above them, Dumbledore sat in his tower with his hairline crack of uncertainty growing steadily wider. "I know you are," Strange said, and in 6 years of training and trust and the complicated particular love of people who don't say it easily, it was the truest thing he'd said. Chapter 6, The Architect Falls. The graveyard at Little Hangleton was cold in a way that had nothing to do with April. Harry had known this was coming since March, when the confluence of signals had reached the specific density that Strange called critical threshold, the point where probability stops being theoretical and starts being scheduled. The Triwizard Tournament, which he'd watched Dumbledore engineer into existence with the particular finesse of a man who had been manufacturing narrative conditions for 8 decades, was the delivery mechanism. The port key in the maze was the final instrument. And Cedric Diggory, walking beside Harry toward the cup with no idea what it was the accidental witness Voldemort's servant had failed to account for. Harry had accounted for him. "Take my arm," Harry said, the moment his hand closed around the portkey's handle, and Cedric had about half a second of confusion before Harry's grip locked around his wrist with the specific force of someone who had made an irreversible decision. And then the world dissolved into blue-gray transit and reassembled itself as a darkened graveyard with a marble tomb at one end and a cauldron in the middle and Wormtail moving through the shadows with the careful, terrified purpose of a small man doing a large man's work. Cedric landed beside Harry and immediately said, "What? Stay behind me," Harry said. "Whatever happens, stay behind me and don't approach the cauldron." "Harry, what is, Cedric?" Harry looked at him directly. Cedric Diggory was 17, honest, genuinely good in the way that didn't require effort, and currently looking at Harry with the expression of someone recalibrating everything he'd assumed about the competition and the quiet 4th year who'd navigated the tournament with unnerving ease. "I'm going to explain everything after. Right now I need you to trust me." Cedric looked at him for 2 seconds. "Okay," he said, which was exactly what he'd said and was the measure of him, the same clean acceptance Harry had valued in Ron from the beginning, the fundamental willingness of good people to be trusted. Wormtail had seen them. He was already moving, already beginning the ritual, and Harry felt the dark resonance of it ramping up in the graveyard's air, old blood magic, old and deliberate and requiring specific elements in specific order. He could stop it. He had the capability to stop it entirely, to shut the ritual down before it completed. He'd been considering whether to do exactly that since February, had discussed it with Strange through the mirror on 3 separate evenings, and had arrived at the same conclusion each time. He needed Voldemort in a body. Not because he was afraid of the fragmentary form, the dispersed presence that remained after Little Hangleton was less than what had possessed Quirrell, less still than the diary's constructed intelligence. But because a Voldemort without a body was a Voldemort who could not be ended permanently, whose remaining Horcruxes served as anchors he could reconstitute from over years or decades. Harry needed him present, physical, fully consolidated, because fully consolidated was fully addressable. He needed him here, tonight, and then he needed him to be done. The ritual completed in a rush of dark fire and displaced air, and Tom Riddle rose from the cauldron with the specific, particular quality of wrongness that attended things that should not exist, too pale, too still, the red eyes burning in a face that had been rebuilt by terrible means and bore no resemblance to the handsome, magnetic face of Riddle's own memory construct. This was what you got when you built a body from bone and flesh and blood with magic as the mortar rather than life as the foundation. Voldemort stood in the graveyard and breathed, and Harry watched him breathe and felt the full scope of what he was, the power, which was enormous, the damage, which was also enormous, the specific quality of a soul that had been divided so many times that the original self was barely a thread in the overall construction. "Harry Potter," Voldemort said, and his voice in a body was thin and cold and carried the controlled satisfaction of 12 years of diminishment finally reversed. He looked at Harry with those burning eyes and did the same assessment Harry had felt from Riddle's construct in the chamber, the same rapid appraisal, except this one had more information, more context, more accumulated hatred to color it. "You look well." "You don't," Harry said. "But I imagine that's to be expected, given the method." Voldemort's eyes narrowed slightly. Wormtail had summoned the Death Eaters, the portkey had triggered an alert, and they were appearing in the graveyard in ones and twos, hooded, the familiar theatrical apparatus of a movement built on fear and spectacle. Harry counted them without looking directly at each one, peripheral awareness calibrated over 4 years of practice. "I expected you to look frightened," Voldemort said. Not taunting. Genuinely observing, in the way of an intelligent person noting a discrepancy. "I know you did," Harry said. "You expected the version of me that Dumbledore built." He took one slow, deliberate step toward Voldemort, and the Death Eaters tensed collectively, which was interesting because Harry had not actually done anything yet. "Can I ask you something?" Voldemort looked at him with those burning eyes and the particular expression of someone recalibrating in real time. "You're going to ask regardless." "Do you know," Harry said, "that Dumbledore needed you? Specifically, personally needed you to exist and to be what you became? That the shape of your life, the cruelty you encountered, the directions you were nudged toward, the cultivated specific flavor of your ambition, was something someone managed? A silence in the graveyard that had nothing to do with the dead around them. "I know what you're doing," Voldemort said, very quietly. "I'm not doing anything," Harry said. "I'm not trying to destabilize you. I'm telling you the truth because you deserve to know it and because I told Tom Riddle the same thing in the chamber 2 years ago and I meant it then too." He held the burning gaze. "You were betrayed first, before you betrayed anyone. That doesn't excuse what you did. But it is the true shape of things, and I don't deal in anything else." He paused. "I'm going to end this tonight. Not because of a prophecy. Not because Dumbledore built me to. Because the things you've done require it and the people you've hurt deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I understand what made you and that the person who made you has been dealt with separately." Something moved through Voldemort's face that Harry had not expected to see there, something that was not quite anger and not quite recognition but a third thing, older and more damaged, a quality of looking at someone who sees the thing you've been rather than the thing you've performed. It lasted less than a second and it was gone. "Kill him," Voldemort said. The killing curses came from 4 directions simultaneously. Harry moved. Not a dodge, not the spatial displacement he'd used against Quirrell's single curse, but something he'd developed specifically for multidirectional attacks, a technique Strange had introduced in theory 2 years ago and Harry had spent 18 months building into reflex. He collapsed the space between the 4 incoming curses and himself using a directional fold that put him, briefly and precisely, nowhere any of them expected to find him, and when he reappeared he was 6 feet to the left of where he'd been standing. 4 killing curses hit the marble tomb behind where he'd been. Voldemort went very still. "Granger," Harry said. From 50 feet away, because Hermione had come through a second portkey Harry had built into the maze's entrance and had been in position for 4 minutes already, a precise, devastating containment field locked around 15 of the 20 Death Eaters present, the kind of multi-person magical binding that should not have been possible for a 14-year-old and absolutely was for Hermione Granger, who had spent 2 years learning the techniques Harry had shared from Strange's manuscripts. And had added 10 layers of her own refinement to each one. "Weasley," Harry said. Ron came through a third portkey 30 feet to the right, already moving, because Ron didn't need a wand to know how to fight, he needed a direction and a clear field, and Harry had spent months teaching him the kind of no-wand close-quarters magical combat that the British wizarding tradition didn't include in its curriculum because it required thinking about magic as a physical property of the person rather than a technical function of the tool. Ron was not at Harry's level. He was not at Hermione's level. He was, however, excellent in the specific way that mattered in a graveyard full of Death Eaters when you needed someone to handle the ones the containment field had missed. Cedric, behind Harry, said, "You planned all of this." "I planned most of this," Harry said. "Some of it I'm improvising." He turned back to Voldemort. Voldemort was watching him with those burning eyes, and the expression in them had moved through anger and recalibration and arrived somewhere more fundamental, the careful attention of a genuinely intelligent person who has met something they didn't predict. "You said the prophecy isn't why you're doing this," Voldemort said. Correct. Then what are you? Harry looked at him. Someone who made his own choices, he said. Which is the thing you never quite managed. He reached into the magical field between them and did something that had taken him 4 years to develop the theory for and 6 months to practice the execution of, something Strange had no name for because it had never been done before, which Strange had told him with characteristic precision and which Harry had found more motivating than discouraging. The Horcrux architecture. He could see it now, spread across Voldemort's soul like the constructed fate lines on the cloth map, the fracture lines, the anchor points, the places where the soul had been divided so many times that the divisions themselves were structural, load-bearing. He could see the remaining Horcruxes as resonant absences in Voldemort's magical field, places where the tether stretched outward to distant objects, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake. He'd identified them all. He'd been identifying them for 2 years. He'd also spent the past 3 weeks, with Strange and Wong working in parallel, doing something extraordinarily difficult, preemptive structural dissolution. Not destroying the objects, they were in locations he couldn't reach tonight, some of them hidden, some of them guarded. But he'd developed a method of addressing the Horcrux binding architecture from the soul end rather than the object end. The same inside-out technique he'd used on the diary, expanded, refined, applied not to a single contained object but to the living network of a fractured soul. It was, Strange had said in February with the flat precision of understatement, the most ambitious piece of magical work he had ever observed anyone attempt. Harry applied it now. Voldemort felt it the moment it started. His eyes went wide, not with pain but with something worse, the recognition of a violation more fundamental than a curse, something reaching into the structure of his continued existence and addressing the architecture directly. He fired curses in rapid succession and Harry turned them all, not with shields but with deflection, the curses finding nothing to grip and sliding past into the dark air. The soul fractures began to collapse. Not violently, not like the diary's implosion. More like a structure that has been held in artificial suspension finally being released. The anchoring bonds to the distant objects dissolved as the architecture failed from the source end, and Harry felt them go one by one, each release a small, clean finality. The locket. The cup. The diadem. The snake, somewhere on the grounds, he felt Nagini's sudden disorientation from 50 yards away, the bond releasing, the Horcrux anchor dissolving. Voldemort was on his knees. Not from the magic's physical force but from the experience of a soul that had been held in divided, fractured, artificial continuity since the 1940s being finally, structurally, completely itself, nothing extended, nothing hidden, nothing external to run to, nothing to survive into. Just what was actually there, stripped of everything he'd used to defy death. What was there was not much. Harry had known it wouldn't be. Tom Riddle at the end of everything was a very small thing, the remainder after a lifetime of subtraction, and what it felt like, what Harry felt, standing in the graveyard with his hand in the architecture of it, was not triumph and not hatred but something quiet and almost sad, the specific sadness of a thing that didn't have to be this way meeting its ending anyway. "It's over," Harry said. Not harshly. Just factually. Voldemort looked up at him from the ground, and those burning eyes were not burning anymore, just red, just the strange color of a rebuilt body, and in them was something Harry had never seen there before and didn't expect to see, a kind of clarity, the particular clarity of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been forced to put it down. He did not beg. Tom Riddle had never been a person who begged. He looked at Harry with that strange new clarity and he said, "The boy from the cupboard." "Yes," Harry said. "You should have been afraid of me," Voldemort said, and there was something in it that was not quite wonder. "I know you," Harry said. "I've always known you. You and Dumbledore both, I knew the shape of both of you before I was 12. Knowing someone is not the same as being afraid of them." He looked at the diminished, terrible, oddly dignified figure on the graveyard ground. "I'm sorry for what was done to you. I'm not sorry for what I'm doing now." Voldemort closed his eyes. Harry completed the dissolution. The rebuilt body became irrelevant. Without the soul's fractured architecture to animate and maintain it, it was just the product of a blood ritual, which was not enough to sustain life. The departure was quiet. Quieter than anything Voldemort had ever done in life. The graveyard was still. Harry stood in the middle of it and breathed, and Hermione came to stand beside him without saying anything, and Ron came from the right with a split lip and two disarmed Death Eaters stumbling in front of him, and Cedric Diggory stood behind Harry and looked at the place where Voldemort had been and said, very quietly, "What are you?" "Someone who grew up," Harry said. He was back at Hogwarts by midnight. The tournament chaos, the discovery of the graveyard via Portkey Trace, the Ministry officials descending, the questions and the forms and Dumbledore's controlled, watchful presence through all of it, had taken 3 hours and would take 3 more days to fully process. Cedric had given his account with the calm precision of a person who had decided to be absolutely honest about everything he'd seen, which was going to cause problems for several narratives simultaneously. Harry had given his account to the DMLE officer on scene, not to Dumbledore, which was a choice Dumbledore noticed immediately and did not remark on. They were alone in the corridor outside the hospital wing at midnight. The school around them was very quiet. Sirius was inside. He'd arrived at the ward boundary the moment the Portkey Trace had registered, which meant Strange had told him, which meant Strange had been tracking the evening's events from the ward boundary the same way he always positioned himself, present but not visible. Dumbledore stood across the corridor from Harry, and for the first time in 4 years of careful, complicated dance, he did not have his hands folded in the patient, warm posture of a man with all the time and all the certainty in the world. He stood squarely, and he looked at Harry, and what was in his face was the thing Harry had seen building since the chess chamber in first year, the hairline crack, now fully open, the certainty fractured by the accumulated weight of 4 years of outcomes that the architecture should not have produced. "He's gone," Dumbledore said. "Yes. The Horcruxes." "Gone," Harry said. "All of them. Including the ones you hadn't told me about." He let that land. "The locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake. I know about the ring too, it's in Gaunt's shack. I dissolved the binding architecture from Voldemort's end, so the objects are just objects now, but I'll retrieve them so they can be properly disposed of." Dumbledore looked at him for a very long time. The blue eyes, which had always contained warmth and calculation in the same space, had something different in them now, not warmth and calculation but warmth and something that might have been, in a different and more self-aware man, shame. "When did you know?" Dumbledore said. "About the Horcruxes specifically?" "2nd year." "About your architecture?" Harry met his eyes. "Since I was 7 years old, Professor." The corridor was very quiet. 7, Dumbledore said. "Someone found me," Harry said. "Before you'd finished building the stage. Before I'd had long enough inside your narrative to start confusing it for my own." He kept his voice even. "Not cruel. Just precise. He showed me my fate lines. The real ones, underneath the ones you built. He showed me what had been taken and taught me how to take it back." Dumbledore was still. "I'm not going to pretend I don't understand why you did it," Harry said. "I understand it very well. You believed it was necessary. You believed you were the only person capable of understanding the full picture well enough to manage it. You believed that the cost, to me, to my parents, to everyone who suffered inside your architecture, was justified by the outcome." He paused. "And you were, in one specific sense, not wrong about the threat. Voldemort was real. The danger was real. The need to address it was real." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "What you were wrong about was thinking that any of that licensed what you did. To me. To my parents. To Sirius. To Neville Longbottom, who grew up without parents because you needed 2 possible subjects for your prophecy to maintain ambiguity as long as possible." Dumbledore flinched. Actually flinched, not the controlled acknowledgement of a man accepting a point, but a physical response to something that landed somewhere genuine. "I know," he said. Very quietly. "I know you know," Harry said, and it was the same thing he'd said in the hospital wing in second year, but it had grown since then, taken on more weight. "The question is what you do with knowing." Dumbledore looked at him with those damaged, brilliant blue eyes. "What would you have me do?" "Tell the truth," Harry said. "To the people who deserve it. Sirius deserves to hear from you directly why you accepted his guilt without evidence. Remus Lupin deserves to know what you knew and what you chose not to act on for the sake of your timeline. Neville's grandmother deserves an honest account of the night his parents were tortured." He paused. "Not because it undoes anything. Because the truth is owed." Dumbledore was very still. "You could destroy me," he said. "Politically, institutionally. You have the evidence." "Yes," Harry said. "I do. But you're not going to." Harry looked at him steadily. "I'm going to let you decide what kind of ending you want," he said. "The evidence exists. It will exist whether or not I use it. What I'm telling you is that the time for managing outcomes is over. The architecture is gone. The piece you built me to be is gone. What's left is a real situation with real people in it, and those people deserve real accountability, and the form that accountability takes is at least partly up to you." He paused. "I am not your weapon. I am not your instrument. I am not your narrative. But I am not your enemy either, if you choose not to require it." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment that had in it the full weight of 8 decades of certainty meeting something that certainty couldn't process, a person who was entirely free of it, who had looked at the most sophisticated manipulation in wizarding history and dismantled it piece by piece and arrived at the other end of it not broken, not vengeful, but whole, and clear, and entirely, inconveniently himself. "Who taught you?" Dumbledore asked. Not the investigative question it might once have been. A genuine one. "Someone who found me when I was 7 years old in a cupboard," Harry said, "and came back." Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, something in the famous face had changed in a way Harry had no word for. "Stephen Strange," Dumbledore said, very quietly. Harry said nothing. "I wondered," Dumbledore said. "For years, I wondered. The Sorcerer Supreme has no formal relationship with the British wizarding tradition, but he is the most capable magical practitioner in the world and he is precise in his objections to people doing what I have done." He paused. "I should have known when the soul fragment disappeared." "You almost knew," Harry said. "You came close twice. And each time," Dumbledore said, slowly, "I found a more comfortable explanation." He looked at Harry with something that was not quite a smile and not quite grief. "The temptation to believe the narrative you've written is the hardest thing to resist. Especially when the narrative is working." "Yes," Harry said. "I know." Dumbledore looked at him sharply. Then, more softly, "Yes. I suppose you do." He straightened, and the movement had in it the quality of something that was not defiance but resolution, an old man making a decision that he knew would cost him everything and making it anyway. "I will speak to Sirius Black tomorrow. Privately, without witnesses, whatever he will allow." He paused. "I will speak to Remus. To Augusta Longbottom." Another pause, longer. "The Wizengamot will hear a full account of my actions in the post-war period before the summer session ends. I will not direct the outcome." Harry looked at him steadily. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Dumbledore said, with a quality of voice Harry had never heard from him, stripped of performance, stripped of warmth as tool, just an old man's tired honesty. "I'm doing what I should have done a very long time ago. The thanks runs the other direction, if anywhere." He looked at Harry one last time. "You will be remarkable. You already are." He paused. "I'm sorry I thought I needed to build you." Harry held his gaze. "I know," he said, for the third time, and now it meant something completely different from either of the first two times, not careful deflection, not precise acknowledgement, but actual, complicated, clear-eyed forgiveness-adjacent truth. The kind that doesn't excuse anything but refuses to require the other person's destruction as the price of its honesty. Dumbledore nodded, once, and walked away down the corridor, and the sound of his footsteps diminished and the corridor was quiet. Strange was sitting on the roof of the astronomy tower when Harry found him, which was a choice that said something about Strange's preferred method of processing difficult evenings: high up, open air, the world at a legible distance. He had his thermos. He had 2 cups. He'd clearly been there for some time. Harry sat beside him and looked out over the grounds, over the lake and the forbidden forest and the distant lights of Hogsmeade, and the night was cold and very clear and the stars were the same stars they always were. "You heard," Harry said. "I heard enough," Strange said. The ward boundaries are permeable to directional magical listening when someone with sufficient baseline is actively doing it. "Meaning you were listening the whole time?" "Meaning I was listening from the moment you stepped off the port key." Strange poured tea, handed a cup across. "You didn't need me to intervene." "I know. You knew I wouldn't." "I knew," Strange agreed. He looked out over the grounds. "Voldemort." "Gone," Harry said. "Permanently." "The dissolution method held. I'll walk you through the execution details tomorrow. There are some refinements I made in the moment that I think have broader applications." "I expected nothing less," Strange said, dry but genuine. "The Horcruxes are objects now. I'll retrieve them this week. Wong will want to be involved in the disposal. He has opinions about soul fragment containment." "He has opinions about everything," Harry said, with the specific warmth of someone who found this entirely endearing. "He does," Strange agreed. He drank his tea. "Dumbledore." "He'll tell the truth," Harry said. "I believe him." "So do I," Strange said, which surprised Harry slightly. "He has spent 80 years being the most capable person in every room he occupies. When someone finally occupies the same room on equal terms and doesn't use it to destroy him, his response is, I think, relief. The kind you only feel after something you've been dreading turns out to be survivable." He paused. "He's been dreading someone finding out for a very long time." Harry thought about this. "The crack," he said. "The uncertainty. It's been building since first year. It's been building since he read the anomaly in your fate lines the September before you started Hogwarts and couldn't explain the discrepancy." Strange's voice was even. "He knows his own work. He couldn't understand why it wasn't quite right. He assumed natural development, assumed variance, and each year the variance grew larger and the explanations became less satisfying." He paused. What he could not allow himself to consider was that someone had found his work and called it what it was. "Because that would require admitting it was visible," Harry said. "That it was findable. That someone had found it. And that someone was a 7-year-old in a cupboard, which means the constraints were always arbitrary," Strange said. "That the cage was always already too small for what was inside it." Harry was quiet for a moment. Below them, the grounds were still. He felt the castle's dual hum, the old neutral magic in the stones, and above it Dumbledore's careful constructed network, and the network was still there but it felt different now, less like a mechanism and more like an old building settling, something that would change, gradually, as the hand that built it chose to release it. "What happens now?" Harry said. "Now?" Strange looked at him. "Now Sirius gets his life back. The Wizengamot hears what they should have heard 12 years ago about Dumbledore's management of the post-war period, and some significant portion of the wizarding world's institutional structure shifts accordingly. Hogwarts gets a headmaster who is, for the first time, genuinely accountable to an external standard." He paused. "Voldemort's people scatter. Some will be brought in. Some will perform contrition and be trusted again in 40 years when the world forgets, because that's what the world does. The war is over. And me? Harry said. Strange was quiet for a moment. He looked at Harry with the gray, precise eyes that had looked at him in a dusty cupboard when he was 7 years old and found the stolen fate lines and decided, without hesitation, to do something about it. You go live your life, Strange said. The one that was always yours. You finish school, not because you need to academically, but because Ron and Hermione are your people and those years matter. You figure out what you want to do with the extraordinary capacity you've built, on your own terms, in your own time. He paused. You let Sirius be your family. You let the people who have found their way to you be real to you. Another pause. You call me when things are interesting. Harry looked at him. Not when things are difficult. Those too, Strange said, without hesitation. Harry nodded. He held his teacup and looked out over the grounds and felt his fate lines, fully his now, every anchor dissolved, every foreign thread removed, the silver running clear and deep and unhurried in every direction, and what they showed him, now that he could read them with the full skill Strange had taught him, was not a destiny. Not a path laid down by someone else, not a prophecy to fulfill or a narrative to inhabit. They showed possibility. Wide, unstructured, multiple, real. The architecture of a life that belonged to its owner. He thought about the cupboard. The dusty smell of it, the thin mattress, the broken toy soldier. The harp note of a tear in the air and a man stepping through it and crouching down so he wasn't looming and saying, with the specific precision of a person who believed in giving people the truth, your fate lines look like someone built a dam across them. He thought about the soldier, fixed in his lap. He thought about tape that didn't run out. He thought about stone floors that hummed. He thought about what Strange had said once, in the room, after the second constraint had cleared and the air had changed, like me. He looked at Strange beside him on the astronomy tower roof. The red cloak, alive in the night air. The silver-scarred hands around a thermos cup. The precise, careful face that came undone occasionally and revealed, underneath, something it had always been. Strange, he said. Yes. I'm going to be fine, Harry said. Strange looked at him for a moment and the expression on his face was completely uncontrolled, completely honest, completely itself, and what it was pride and relief and love in the specific form of a man who doesn't use the word but has never been anything else. I know, Strange said. Below them, the castle settled into its stones. The ground stretched quiet and dark toward the distant mountains. The stars ran their vast indifferent courses across the sky and Harry Potter, 14 years old, sat beside the man who had found him when he was 7 and shown him the shape of what had been taken, and he was entirely, remarkably, irreversibly free. There was nothing left to dismantle. There was everything left to build. 3 days later, when the ministry had done its documenting and Cedric had given his account to 3 separate officials and the Daily Prophet was running headlines that would take a week to stop contradicting each other, Harry went back to the cupboard. Not to live in it, Sirius's house, Grimmauld Place, was being cleared of dark objects with the combined effort of Sirius and Hermione and Wong, who had shown up unannounced and announced he had opinions about the wall tapestry, which he did. Harry was moving there for the summer. He went back to the cupboard one more time because it was his. It was where things had started, and he wanted to close it himself. He stood in it for a moment, in the dust and the old rubber smell, and he touched the shelf where he'd kept the manuscripts and the pendant's communication link and the small brass containment vessel before he'd taken it to the sanctum. The loose board that Strange had made undetectable. The dent in the wall from a night in second year when a nightmare had expressed itself before he could stop it. He reached up and took the roll of tape from its shelf. Still there. Still warm. He put it in his pocket. Then he walked out of the cupboard, through the Dursleys' house. Vernon in the kitchen went pale and very still and Harry looked at him with the specific, final look of someone who has decided that a chapter is completely over and said nothing, and out the front door, and he didn't look back at number 4 Privet Drive. The pendant was warm against his chest. The fate lines ran clear. He walked up Privet Drive and at the end of it opened a portal, and stepped through into his life.